California sober. Jace counted the bills again, knowing it would still be 1,000 even, but doing it anyway because touching money felt good. 20s mostly, some 10s, a few crumpled 5s that smelled like cigarettes and defeat. 3 months of dealing dime bags to the losers at Pine Ridge Mobile Home Park, and this was what he had to show for it. Not bad for government cheese, he said to nobody. The trailer was quiet, except for the hum of the mini fridge, and Mrs. Kowalski next door screaming at her cats again. Jace folded the money, tucked it in his front pocket, and grabbed his keys. Time to make a move. The grow shop in Eureka didn't look like much, just another strip mall storefront, between a check cashing place and a taco joint that probably hadn't passed inspection since the Clinton administration. But the kid behind the counter knew his business. First time? The kid asked. He had gauges in his ears and a neck tattoo that said, "Blessed" in Gothic script. That obvious? You got that look. Like you're buying condoms at 16. The kid grinned. What you thinking? Indoor, outdoor? Indoor. Small setup. How small we talking? Jace looked around the shop, noting the security cameras in the corners. Small enough not to get noticed. The kid nodded like this made perfect sense. Shed grow. Classic. You want 6 plants, maybe 8 if you're feeling lucky. LED lights, decent ventilation, some decent soil. He started pulling items off shelves. Fox Farm's good for beginners. Ocean Forest. Plants'll love it. How much? $600 for everything. That's friends and family. Jace pulled out 400s. This is what I got. 4 bills. The kid considered this. Okay. We do this right, you'll make it back first harvest. What's your timeline? Soon as possible. Aren't we all, brother? Aren't we all? The plants looked like nothing special in their little pots, just green leaves and possibility. Jace arranged them in the back corner of the aluminum shed behind his trailer, running the extension cord through a gap in the door frame. The LED panel hummed to life, bathing everything in purple light. 6 plants. That's what the kid had said would fit. 6 plants that could yield maybe £1 each if he didn't screw it up. At street prices, that was serious money. Real money. The kind that could get him out of Pine Ridge and into something that didn't smell like mold and broken dreams. Carl Brennan stood at his kitchen window next door, coffee mug in hand, watching. Carl was one of those guys who'd done time upstate and never let you forget it. Prison tats, prison stories, prison wisdom nobody asked for. The kind of neighbor who knew everybody's business and made it his job to know more. Jace waved. Carl waved back, but his eyes stayed on the shed. The Rusty Pelican was the kind of bar where the pool table had cigarette burns and the jukebox played nothing but country music from the Carter administration. Jace liked it because the bartender was Tara, and Tara had green eyes and curves that made him forget about everything else for a while. You look different, she said, pulling him a beer without being asked. Different how? I don't know. Like you got a secret. Maybe I do. She leaned across the bar, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with cigarette smoke and something else, something that made his blood move faster. What kind of secret? The kind that makes money. Those are the best kind. The bar was mostly empty, except for a couple of old-timers playing cribbage, and a woman in scrubs who looked like she'd just finished a double shift at the hospital. Tara poured herself a shot of something amber and knocked it back. You want to know a secret, she said. Always. I get off at 10. They ended up in the alley behind the bar, pressed against the brick wall next to the dumpster. Her skirt hiked up, his hands everywhere they shouldn't be, both of them breathing hard and not caring who might see. It was quick and desperate, and exactly what they both needed. Afterward, she fixed her hair in the reflection of his truck window. This doesn't mean anything, she said. I know. Good. Because I don't do complicated. Neither do I. She lit a cigarette, the flame from her lighter making her face glow for a second in the darkness. What's your secret, Jace? The money one. Just a side business. What kind of side business? The kind that's none of your business. She laughed, smoke curling from her lips. Fair enough. But if you ever need help moving product, I know people. What kind of people? The kind with money and poor impulse control. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her heel. I should get back inside. Jace watched her walk away, admiring the view and wondering if she was serious about helping. Probably not. People said a lot of things when they had their blood up. Back at the trailer, the purple light was still glowing in the shed window. Jace checked the plants one more time, adjusting the light, checking the soil moisture, playing grower like he knew what he was doing. Carl's kitchen light was on, and Jace could see him sitting at his table, still drinking coffee, even though it was past midnight. Some people never slept, just moved from one form of consciousness to another. Inside the trailer, Jace made himself a sandwich and counted his money again. $600 for the growing setup left him with $400 and change. Enough to keep dealing while the plants did their thing. Enough to buy groceries and pay the lot rent, and maybe take Tara somewhere nicer than an alley. The plants would take 3 months to mature. 3 months of waiting and hoping, and trying not to think about what could go wrong. Cops, thieves, plant diseases, nosy neighbors who'd done time upstate and had opinions about everything. But if it worked, if the plants grew and the harvest was decent, and he could move the product without getting arrested or killed, he'd have enough money to think about his next move. Maybe buy some land up in the hills. Maybe set up a real operation. Maybe get out of Pine Ridge for good. Jace finished his sandwich and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, he'd start dealing again, moving the same dime bags to the same losers, pretending like nothing had changed. But something had changed. He could feel it in the purple glow coming from the shed, in the possibility growing under artificial light. For the first time in his 19 years, Jace Ryland had a plan. Chapter 2. 2 weeks in, and the plants were actually growing. Jace hadn't expected that. He'd figured they'd die or wilt, or do whatever plants did when you didn't know what you were doing. But the little green bastards were getting bigger, reaching toward the purple light like they had somewhere to be. He checked them every morning before coffee, every evening after dealing. Sometimes twice in between, if business was slow. The kid at the grow shop had said not to overwater them, so Jace stuck his finger in the soil every time, feeling for moisture like he was taking the earth's temperature. Looking good, he told the plants. Talking to them felt stupid, but the kid had mentioned something about plants liking conversation. Jace drew the line at playing the music. The nutrient schedule was taped to the shed wall: when to feed, what to feed, how much water. Simple enough that even a trailer park dropout could handle it. Feed them Tuesday and Friday, water when the soil felt dry, keep the light on 18 hours a day. Like taking care of expensive pets that might make you rich. Carl was still watching from his kitchen window every morning, coffee in hand like it was his job. This morning, he wandered over while Jace was watering. Interesting hobby you got there, Carl said. Just some plants. Purple light's pretty bright for regular plants. Jace kept watering, not looking up. It's an art project. Art project? Carl nodded like this made sense. What kind of art you making in there? The kind that's none of your business. Carl laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. Relax, kid. I'm not the law. Did 12 years at Pelican Bay. You think I give a shit about somebody growing a little herb? Then why you asking? Curious. Plus, you know, neighbors should look out for each other. Jace turned off the hose and looked at Carl for the first time. Mid-50s, gray hair, arms like a guy who'd spent serious time lifting weights in a concrete box. Prison tats covered his forearms. Badly done numbers and letters that probably meant something to somebody. Look out for each other how? Just saying. You ever need anything, I'm right next door. Security, muscle, whatever. Carl's smile showed teeth that had seen better decades. For a reasonable fee, of course. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. Carl headed back to his trailer, coffee mug in hand. Nice talking to you, neighbor. Jace watched him go, wondering if that was a threat or an offer. With guys like Carl, the difference wasn't always clear. The Rusty Pelican was dead on a Tuesday afternoon. Just Jace, the old-timers with their cribbage board, and Tara polishing glasses behind the bar. She looked up when he walked in, smiled like she meant it. Afternoon, stranger. Beer and a question. Beer's easy. Question depends on what you're asking. She pulled him a draft, foam spilling over the rim. Her tank top was tight enough that he could see the outline of her bra, and she knew he was looking. They both knew he was looking. You know a guy named Vic? The smile faded a little. Why? Somebody mentioned him. Said he deals around here. Vic Torrance. Yeah, I know him. Big guy, drives a black pickup, thinks he owns this part of the county. She set the beer down harder than necessary. Why you asking about Vic? Just curious. Curious'll get you hurt around here. Vic doesn't like competition. Who said anything about competition? Tara leaned across the bar, voice dropping. You're dealing, aren't you? That's your secret money business. Jance took a sip of beer, not answering. I'm right. She shook her head. Jesus, Jace. You know what happens to people who try to freelance in Vic's territory? What happens? They stop freelancing. Sometimes they stop other things too. One of the old-timers called for another round. Tara moved down the bar, leaving Jace with his beer and new information. Vic Torrance. Black pickup. Territorial. Good to know. When she came back, she looked worried. You need to be careful, she said. I'm always careful. No, you're not. Careful people don't start growing weed in their backyard shed. How do you know about the shed? Lucky guess. She started wiping down the bar again, not meeting his eyes. Plus Carl's been talking. Carl's been talking to you? Carl talks to everybody. It's what he does. She looked up. He's also been asking questions about you. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think you should find a new hobby. Jace finished his beer and left a 10 on the bar. Thanks for the warning. Jace. She caught his arm as he turned to go. I meant what I said the other night. About knowing people who buy. But you need to be smart about this. Vic finds out you're growing, he's going to want a piece. And if you don't give him a piece, he'll take the whole thing. He'll take everything. Outside, the afternoon sun felt good after the dim bar. Jace sat in his truck for a minute, thinking about Vic Torrance and black pickups and Carl's coffee mug surveillance. The plants were doing fine, growing bigger every day. In 2 months, maybe less, he'd have something to sell. Real weight, not dime bags. But Tara was right about one thing. He needed to be smart. Growing was one thing. Moving product was something else. You couldn't just put a sign in your yard, fresh weed, reasonable prices. Back at Pine Ridge, he checked the plants again. They were definitely bigger, leaves spreading wider, stems getting thicker. The kid at the grow shop had been right about the ocean forest soil. The plants loved it. Carl's truck wasn't in his driveway, which was good. Jace didn't feel like another neighborly conversation about art projects and mutual assistance. He had enough to think about without adding Carl's prison wisdom to the mix. Inside the trailer, he counted his money again. Still had $300 and change after buying groceries and paying the lot rent. Enough to keep dealing while he waited for the real payday. But Tara's warning stuck with him. Vic Torrance. Black pickup. Territorial. Maybe it was time to start thinking about what came after the plants were ready. Where to sell, how much to ask, what to do if Vic came calling. The kid at the grow shop had made it sound easy: grow the plants, harvest the buds, count the money. But guys like the kid didn't have to worry about guys like Vic. Jace made himself a sandwich and turned on the television. Nothing but talk shows and commercials for products he'd never be able to afford. He switched it off and went back to the shed, checking the plants one more time even though nothing had changed in the last hour. They were still growing, still reaching toward the purple light. In 8 weeks, maybe 10, he'd know if his plan was genius or suicide. Either way, it beat dealing dime bags to the losers at Pine Ridge for the rest of his life. Carl's truck pulled into the driveway next door, just as Jace was closing the shed. The old con waved from his driver's seat, coffee mug in his other hand like always. "Evening, neighbor," Carl called. "How's that art project coming along?" "Fine," Jace said. "Glad to hear it. Art's important. Keeps a man occupied." Carl climbed out of his truck, stretched like his back hurt. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About minding my own business." "Yeah. Thing is, in a place like this, everybody's business is everybody's business. That's just how it works." Carl's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "But don't worry. Your secret's safe with me." Jace watched him disappear into his trailer, wondering what that meant and whether he should care. The plants were growing, the money was coming, and everybody had an opinion about his business. Just like Tara said, careful people didn't grow weed in backyard sheds. But careful people stayed broke, and Jace was tired of being broke. Chapter 3. The plants were 4 weeks old when Jace made his first real sale. Not a dime bag to some trailer park burnout, but a half-ounce to Tommy Escobar, who ran a crew doing drywall for the new housing development outside Fortuna. Tommy had money and connections, and a pickup truck that didn't break down every other week. "This is good shit," Tommy said, examining the bag in the parking lot behind Safeway. "Where are you getting it?" "Around." "Around where? Does it matter?" Tommy smiled and handed over 200 in 20s. "Guess not. How much more you got?" "How much more you want?" "I got 5 guys on my crew. They go through maybe 2 ounces a week, all told." Tommy pocketed the bag. "You can handle that?" "I can handle that." "Good. Same time next week?" Jace nodded and watched Tommy drive away in his clean pickup truck. $200 for what had cost him maybe 30 to grow. The math was simple enough that even a high school dropout could figure it out. Back at Pine Ridge, he bought better nutrients for the plants. Fox Farm Tiger Bloom, the good stuff that cost $40 a bottle but was supposed to make the buds bigger and denser. Money well spent, if it meant Tommy's crew would keep coming back. The plants were definitely flowering now, white hairs sprouting from green clusters that would become the product. 2 more months and he'd have pounds, not ounces. Real weight that would bring real money. Carl was waiting by the mailboxes when Jace got back from the grow shop. "Afternoon, neighbor. Making improvements to your art project?" "Something like that." "What kind of art you making again?" Jace showed him the nutrient bottle. "Sculpture. These are for the clay. Tiger Bloom for clay sculpture." Carl read the label. "That's some expensive clay." "It's specialized clay." "I bet it is." Carl handed him a folded piece of paper. "Found this in your mailbox. Looks official." Jace unfolded the notice. Humboldt County Sheriff's Department. Community patrol schedule for Pine Ridge Mobile Home Park. They'd be doing regular drive-thrus starting next week, checking for code violations and suspicious activity. "Interesting timing," Carl said. "Why's that?" "Just funny how these patrol schedules show up right when folks start new hobbies." Carl's smile was all prison teeth again. "But I'm sure it's just coincidence." Jace folded the notice and put it in his pocket. "Probably." Course, sometimes coincidences cost money to fix. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just making conversation. Carl started walking toward his trailer. Nice talking to you, neighbor. The Rusty Pelican was busier than usual for a Wednesday night. Tara was working 2 sections, running between tables with plates of fish and chips and bottles of beer. She looked tired, and her hair was coming loose from its ponytail. Jace waited at the bar until she had a minute. Busy night, he said. Tell me about it. What do you need? Just a beer. And maybe some advice. She pulled him a draft and glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. What kind of advice? The kind about neighbors who ask for money to solve problems that don't exist yet. Carl. How'd you know? Because Carl's been asking for money to solve problems for 20 years. It's his business model. She wiped down the bar with a dirty rag. What's he want? Didn't say exactly. Just mentioned that coincidences cost money to fix. Coincidences like sheriff's patrols and art projects? Jace nodded. How much money you got? Not enough to pay Carl and keep my business running. Then you better figure out which one's more important. A customer waved her over. Back in a minute. Jace sipped his beer and thought about Carl and sheriff's patrols and what happened to people who couldn't pay for coincidences to be fixed. The smart play was probably to pay Carl something, keep him happy until the harvest came in. But smart plays required money he didn't have. Tara came back looking more tired than before. You okay? Jace asked. Long day. Longer night. She leaned against the bar. You want my advice about Carl? Sure. Don't pay him. Not yet. Why not? Because once you start paying Carl, you never stop paying Carl. And what you're paying for gets more expensive every month. She straightened up as another customer called for service. But if you don't pay him... What? Then you better be ready for whatever coincidence he's talking about. The drive back to Pine Ridge took 15 minutes through empty rural roads, lined with redwoods and abandoned logging equipment. Jace kept checking his mirrors, paranoid about sheriff's patrols and black pickup trucks and neighbors who made their living off other people's problems. The trailer park was quiet, except for Mrs. Kowalski's television and somebody's dog barking at nothing. Carl's truck was in his driveway, kitchen light on as usual. Jace parked and sat in his truck for a minute, looking at the shed where 6 plants were growing bigger every day. In 8 weeks, he'd have maybe 4 pounds of sellable product. At wholesale prices, that was $15,000. At retail, maybe twice that. Enough money to get out of Pine Ridge and start over somewhere else. Somewhere without nosy neighbors and sheriff's patrols and territorial dealers named Vic. But 8 weeks was a long time. Long enough for a lot of coincidences to happen. Inside the trailer, Jace made himself dinner and counted his money again. 300 and change after buying the nutrients. Tommy would want his 2 ounces next week, which meant another 400 coming in. Not enough to pay Carl and keep dealing, but enough to buy time. The television had nothing but sitcoms and commercials for products he couldn't afford. He turned it off and went to check the plants one more time. They were definitely bigger, the flowering sites more developed. The tiger bloom was supposed to make them finish faster and yield more. Worth every penny, if it meant getting out of Pine Ridge before the coincidences started happening. Carl's kitchen light was still on when Jace locked up the shed. The old con was probably sitting at his table, drinking coffee, and thinking about art projects and community patrol schedules. Wondering how much his coincidence-fixing services were worth, and whether his neighbor was smart enough to pay for them. Back in the trailer, Jace lay on his bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow, he'd deal with Tommy's crew and make another 400. Next week, he'd deal with Carl and whatever coincidence needed fixing. But tonight, he just listened to Mrs. Kowalski's television, and somebody's dog barking, and the sound of his own breathing in the dark. 8 weeks. That's all he needed. 8 weeks for the plants to finish, and the money to come in, and his real life to start. But in a place like Pine Ridge, 8 weeks was forever. Long enough for neighbors to get greedy, and sheriffs to get curious, and territorial dealers to start asking questions. Long enough for careful people to get themselves killed. But Jace wasn't careful people. Careful people dealt dime bags to trailer park losers for the rest of their lives. Careful people never took risks and never made real money, and never got out of places like Pine Ridge. He closed his eyes and thought about Tommy's crew and their steady 2 ounces a week. About wholesale prices and retail markup, and what 4 pounds of premium bud could buy in the real world. About getting far enough away from Humboldt County that nobody would know his name or care about his business. 8 weeks. He could handle 8 weeks of coincidences and community patrols and Carl's coffee mug surveillance. The plants were growing, the money was coming, and for the first time in his life Jace Ryland had something worth protecting. Even if protecting it meant doing things that careful people wouldn't do. Chapter 4. Tara showed up at the trailer Thursday night around 11, still wearing her work clothes and smelling like cigarettes and fryer grease. She didn't knock, just walked in like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About Vic Torrance asking questions about you." Jace was sitting on the couch, counting the day's take from Tommy's crew. 400 in 20s and 10s, exactly what Tommy had promised. He folded the money and put it in his pocket. What kind of questions? The kind that get people hurt. Tara sat down next to him, close enough that he could see the tiredness in her green eyes. He came into the Pelican this afternoon, ordered a beer, and started asking about new faces in the area. And I told him I didn't know any new faces. But he's not stupid, Jace. He knows somebody's dealing his territory. How's he know that? Because people talk. Tommy Escobar's been buying weight from somebody, and it ain't Vic. She kicked off her shoes and pulled her feet up under her. Tommy's got a big mouth when he's drunk. Jace thought about Tommy and his crew, solid customers who paid on time and didn't ask stupid questions. Losing them would hurt, but losing them was better than dealing with Vic Torrance. What's Vic look like? Big guy. Maybe 6'4", probably 250. Drives a black Chevy extended cab. Got a scar on his left hand from a chainsaw accident. Tara reached for his beer and took a sip. Why? Just want to know who I'm looking for. You're not looking for anybody. You're staying away from Vic and his business. His business is my business now. No, it's not. She set the beer down harder than necessary. Your business is staying alive long enough to spend whatever money you're making. Jace looked at her sitting on his couch, hair falling across her face, work shirt wrinkled from a long shift. She was pretty in a tired way, like somebody who'd been fighting the world too long but hadn't given up yet. You want to stay? He asked. That depends. On what? On whether you're going to do something stupid about Vic. I'm not going to do anything about Vic. Good. She stood up and started unbuttoning her shirt. Because I don't sleep with dead men. They ended up on his mattress, her skin warm against his, both of them moving with the kind of urgency that came from knowing nothing lasted long. No talking, no promises, just the two of them taking what they needed from each other. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, smoking a cigarette and watching the ceiling fan turn. You ever think about getting out of here? She asked. Every day. Where would you go? Somewhere with better weather. Maybe Arizona. Arizona's nothing but desert and old people. Better than trailer parks and nosy neighbors. She laughed, smoke curling from her lips. You got a point there. What about you? You ever think about leaving? All the time. But thinking and doing are different things. She stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray on his nightstand. Besides, where would I go? I got no money, no skills except pouring drinks and taking orders. You could learn new skills. Could. But learning takes time, and time costs money I don't have. They lay there in the dark, listening to Mrs. Kowalski's television through the thin walls. Some late-night movie with lots of gunfire and dramatic music. Tara's breathing slowed, and Jace thought she might be falling asleep. I meant what I said about knowing people, she said quietly. What people? People who buy weight. Not Tommy and his crew, but real buyers. People with serious money. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to need them. Once Vic figures out who you are, you won't be able to sell retail anymore. Too dangerous. So I sell wholesale. To people who don't ask questions and pay cash and don't give a shit about territorial disputes. She rolled over to face him. But they're not people you want to fuck with. They make Vic look like a Sunday school teacher. How do you know these people? I know lots of people. Comes with the job. She kissed his chest, tasting like cigarettes and something else. But I only introduce you if you promise to be smart about it. What's smart? Smart is you don't get greedy. Smart is you take their money and don't ask questions. Smart is you don't try to renegotiate terms or shortchange them or do anything else that might make them unhappy. And if they get unhappy, then you disappear. Fast. Jace thought about wholesale buyers and territorial dealers and neighbors who fixed coincidences for a living. The plants in his shed were 6 weeks from harvest, maybe less. 6 weeks to navigate between Carl's extortion and Vic's territory and Tara's mysterious buyers who made Vic look like a Sunday school teacher. You ever wonder why I'm telling you all this? Tara asked. Because you want to help. Because I want you to succeed. There's a difference. What's the difference? Help is free. What I'm offering costs money. Jace wasn't surprised. In his experience, everything cost money. The question was whether what you got was worth what you paid. How much money? 10% of whatever you make from my connections. That's steep. That's business. I introduce you to people who can move serious weight. You give me a finder's fee. Everybody wins. And if I say no, then you keep dealing to Tommy's crew and hope Vic doesn't figure out who you are before you can harvest your crop. She sat up and started getting dressed. But we both know how that story ends. Jace watched her pull on her shirt, thinking about percentages and finder's fees and the mathematics of survival. 10% of a big number was still a big number. 10% of nothing was nothing. Okay, he said. Okay, what? 10%. But only if your people are serious. They're serious. She finished buttoning her shirt and leaned down to kiss him. But remember what I said about being smart. I remember. Good. Because once I make that introduction, there's no going back. These aren't people who forget faces or forgive mistakes. After she left, Jace lay in bed and thought about Vic Torrance and chainsaw scars and people who made territorial dealers look like Sunday school teachers. The smart play was probably to harvest his crop, take whatever money he could get, and disappear before anyone figured out who he was. But smart plays were for people who had options. Jace had 6 plants in a shed, and $300 in his pocket, and a neighbor who wanted to be paid for fixing coincidences. Not enough to run, not enough to hide, barely enough to keep playing the game. He got up and checked the plants one more time. They were flowering nicely, white hairs turning brown, the smell getting stronger every day. Another month, and he'd know whether his plan was genius or suicide. Carl's kitchen light was off for once, his truck dark in the driveway. Even old cons had to sleep sometime. But Jace knew the coffee mug surveillance would resume in the morning, along with casual questions about art projects and community patrol schedules. Back in the trailer, he counted his money again. $700 now, after Tommy's payment. Not enough to pay Carl and keep dealing, but enough to buy time if he spent it right. The problem was figuring out what right meant in a world where everyone had an angle and nothing was ever what it seemed. Tara wanted 10% for making introductions. Carl wanted money for fixing coincidences. Vic wanted answers about who was dealing in his territory. And Jace wanted to survive long enough to spend the money his plants were going to make. 6 weeks. That's all he needed. 6 weeks to navigate between all the people who wanted something from him and get to the payoff that would change everything. In a place like Pine Ridge, 6 weeks was still forever. Chapter 5. The plants were ready on a Tuesday morning in October. Jace knew because the trichomes had turned milky white under his jeweler's loupe, and the smell coming from the shed was strong enough that he worried about the mailman noticing. 8 weeks of watering and feeding and checking for bugs, and now he had 6 plants heavy with buds that looked like something from a magazine. He started cutting at dawn, working carefully with scissors he'd bought specifically for trimming. The first plant yielded more than he'd expected, dense, sticky buds that filled a paper grocery bag. By noon, he had all 6 plants harvested and hanging upside down from the shed rafters to dry. 2 pounds. Maybe a little more once everything was properly cured. At wholesale prices, that was $8,000. At retail, closer to 15 if he was patient and found the right buyers. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. Carl was waiting by the mailboxes when Jace came back from buying more groceries to celebrate. "Smells like your art project's finished," Carl said. "Don't know what you mean." "Course you don't." Carl's prison-tooth smile was wider than usual. "But that's some fragrant clay you've been working with." Jace kept walking toward his trailer, but Carl fell into step beside him. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation. About coincidences and community patrol schedules." "Yeah. Seems like coincidences are getting more expensive. Inflation, you know." "How much more expensive?" "Well, now that your art project's finished, I'd say maybe 500 would cover it. For the month." 500's a lot of money. So's federal prison. Carl stopped walking and looked directly at Jace. "Course, if 500's too much, we could always let the coincidences happen naturally." Jace thought about the 2 pounds drying in his shed and what they'd be worth once he found buyers. 500 was a lot, but not compared to losing everything. "I'll think about it," he said. "Don't think too long. Coincidences have a way of happening when you least expect them." The Rusty Pelican was busy for a Tuesday night. Tara was working 3 sections, running between tables with plates of fried everything and bottles of domestic beer. She looked up when Jace walked in, nodded toward the bar. "Be right there," she called. He ordered a beer from the other bartender and waited. When Tara finally had a minute, she looked tired but pleased to see him. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Like somebody who just made some money." "Maybe I did." "How much money?" Jace looked around the bar, noting the regulars and the strangers and the couple in the corner booth who might be cops. "Enough to be worth talking about." "Good." She wiped down the bar with a wet rag. "Because I talked to my people. They're interested." "What did you tell them?" "That I know somebody who might have quality product in quantity. They want to meet." "When?" "Tomorrow night. But we need to discuss terms first." A customer called for service. Tara held up one finger and went to take care of business. When she came back, she looked more serious. "These aren't people who waste time," she said. "You meet them, you better have product to show. Real product, not stems and seeds." "I got real product." How much? Enough. That's not an answer. They want to know exactly how much and exactly what quality. Jace thought about the 2 pounds drying in his shed. 2 pounds. Maybe a little more. Premium indoor, properly cured. 2 pounds. She nodded like this was acceptable. They'll want to test it first. Then, if it's what you say it is, they'll make an offer. What kind of offer? Wholesale. 4,000 a pound, if it's really premium. 4,000. Jace had been hoping for more, but 4,000 times 2 was still $8,000. More than enough to pay Carl, and keep dealing, and maybe even get out of Pine Ridge. That works. Good. But remember what I said about being smart. I remember. These people don't negotiate. They make an offer, you take it or leave it. You try to haggle, the meeting's over. What else? You bring the product, they bring the money. Cash only. No checks, no credit, no IOUs. Sounds simple enough. Simple and easy are different things. Another customer waved her over. Meet me here tomorrow at 9. We'll drive together. After she left to take care of the customer, Jace finished his beer and thought about wholesale buyers and cash transactions and people who didn't waste time. $8,000 would solve a lot of problems. Enough to pay Carl for a few months. Enough to set up a bigger operation. Enough to start thinking about getting out of the game entirely. But first, he had to get through the meeting. Back at Pine Ridge, he checked the drying buds one more time. They were losing moisture nicely, the stems beginning to snap when bent. Another few days, and they'd be ready to cure properly. The smell was incredible, sweet and skunky and strong enough to make his eyes water. Carl's truck was in the driveway, kitchen light on as usual. Jace could see him sitting at his table, coffee mug in hand, probably thinking about art projects and monthly payments. $500 for making sure coincidences didn't happen. The mathematics were simple. Pay Carl $500 a month, or lose everything to a sheriff's patrol that might or might not be coincidence. But mathematics didn't account for the fact that once you started paying people like Carl, the price only went up. Inside the trailer, Jace made himself dinner and tried to think through his options. Pay Carl, and hope the wholesale buyers were legitimate. Don't pay Carl, and hope the sheriff's patrols were really just routine. Try to deal with both problems at once, and hope he didn't get caught in the middle. None of the options were good, but that was life in Pine Ridge. You played the cards you were dealt, and hoped the other players weren't better at cheating than you were. The television had nothing but sitcoms and commercials for products that required good credit and steady employment. Jace turned it off and went to check the plants one more time. They smelled like money and possibility, and maybe a way out of trailer parks forever. Tomorrow night he'd find out if Tara's wholesale buyers were serious, or if this was another scam in a world full of scams. Either way, he'd have his answer about whether growing weed was the solution to his problems or just a more expensive way to create new ones. Carl's kitchen light was still on when Jace locked up the shed. The old con was probably calculating monthly payments and wondering how much his coincidence-fixing services were really worth. In Carl's world, everything was negotiable, except the fact that everybody paid eventually. But Jace wasn't everybody. He was a 19-year-old kid with 2 pounds of premium bud, and enough ambition to believe he could beat the system that had beaten everyone else he knew. Back in the trailer, he lay on his bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow night, he'd either be $8,000 richer, or he'd find out that Tara's people were another version of Carl, just with better clothes and more expensive threats. But tonight he had 2 pounds of the best weed he'd ever grown drying in his shed, and for the first time since he was old enough to understand what money meant, Jace Ryland had something worth selling. The question was whether he'd live long enough to spend what he made from it. Outside, Mrs. Kowalski's television was playing some old movie with lots of violins and dramatic dialogue. Somebody's dog was barking at nothing, and a car with a bad muffler drove through the trailer park too fast. Normal Pine Ridge sounds on a normal Tuesday night. But nothing felt normal anymore. Tomorrow night would change everything, one way or another. Either he'd take his first step into a bigger game, or he'd find out that bigger games were just better ways to lose everything you had. Jace closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the trailer park settling into another night of broken dreams and modest disasters. In 12 hours, he'd know whether his plan was working, or whether he was just another Pine Ridge casualty who thought he was smarter than the system. But tonight, for the first time in his life, he had something worth losing. Chapter 6. Jace woke up to silence. Not the normal Pine Ridge silence of people sleeping off hangovers and broken dreams, but the wrong kind of silence that made his stomach clench before he was fully awake. No hum from the dehumidifier in the shed. No quiet whir of the exhaust fan. He rolled out of bed and looked through the window. The shed door was open, hanging crooked on its hinges like a broken jaw. Even from 30 feet away, he could see the destruction inside. Overturned buckets, scattered equipment, his drying racks torn down and empty. Son of a bitch. He pulled on jeans and boots and ran outside. The shed looked like a tornado had hit it. His trimming table was flipped over, scissors scattered across the floor, the dehumidifier kicked in and leaking water everywhere. The smell of ruined weed hung in the air like funeral flowers. Gone. All of it. 2 pounds of premium bud that had taken 8 weeks to grow gone in one night. Along with his grow lights, nutrients, and anything else that wasn't nailed down. Carl's truck was in the driveway next door, but his kitchen light was off. Unusual for 7 in the morning. Carl was always up with coffee and morning surveillance by 6:30. Jace walked to Carl's front door and knocked. No answer. He knocked harder. Carl. Open up. Still nothing. Jace tried the handle. Unlocked. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The trailer smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes and something else. Something sweet and skunky that didn't belong in Carl's kitchen. On the table sat a paper grocery bag, the same kind Jace had used to collect his harvest. Next to it, Carl's morning coffee, still warm. You looking for something? Jace spun around. Carl stood in the hallway wearing boxers and a wife beater, looking like he'd just woken up. But his eyes were alert, watching Jace's face for reactions. Yeah. I'm looking for my weed. Your weed. 2 pounds of it. From my shed. Carl scratched his belly and walked to the coffee pot. Don't know anything about that. Coffee. Cut the shit, Carl. You took it. Took what? I don't know what you're talking about. Carl poured himself a fresh cup, ignoring the bag on the table. Besides, I thought you were making art. Where is it? Where's what? Jace looked at the bag again, then back at Carl. The old con was smiling his prison tooth smile, enjoying the game. You want to sell it back to me, Jace said. Sell what back? My product. I don't have your product. I don't even know what your product is supposed to be. Carl sipped his coffee. But hypothetically, if somebody had found some valuable items that had been carelessly stored in an unsecured location, they might be willing to return those items for a finder's fee. How much? Hypothetically. Hypothetically. Well, 2 pounds of premium indoor is worth maybe $8,000 on the street. A reasonable finder's fee might be 50%. $4,000. Jace felt something cold settle in his chest. $4,000 for my own weed. For hypothetical weed that hypothetically belongs to somebody who hypothetically should have been more careful about security. Carl's smile got wider. But like I said, I don't know anything about any weed. I don't have 4,000. That's unfortunate. Because if these hypothetical items aren't claimed soon, they might end up getting disposed of. You know how it is with perishable goods. Jace looked around Carl's trailer. Small kitchen, smaller living room, bedroom in the back. The bag on the table was the right size, the right shape. His 2 pounds, sitting 3 feet away, might as well have been on the moon. What if I had 2,000? 2,000's not 4,000. It's what I can get. Then I guess you need to get more creative about your financing. Carl finished his coffee and set the cup in the sink. Or accept that sometimes people lose things they should have been more careful with. Carl. Yeah. You know what happens to people who steal from dealers? Carl's smile faded, but only for a second. You threatening me, kid? Just asking a question. Here's another question. You know what happens to people who threaten ex-cons, who've got nothing to lose and connections in 3 different county jails? They looked at each other across Carl's kitchen, both of them calculating odds and consequences. Carl had the weed, and the experience and probably weapons Jace didn't know about. But Jace had anger and desperation, and nothing left to lose. I want my product back, Jace said. And I want a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm going to get them. Carl walked toward the front door, opened it. You should probably go now. Before one of us says something we can't take back. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright after the dim trailer. Jace walked back to his shed and surveyed the damage again. Everything valuable was gone. Everything else was destroyed. 8 weeks of work and 2 pounds of premium product vanished because he'd trusted a $20 padlock to keep out a guy who'd spent 12 years learning how to get into places he wasn't supposed to be. The smart thing would be to cut his losses and start over. Set up somewhere Carl couldn't find, maybe in the hills like he'd been thinking about anyway. But starting over required money he didn't have and time he couldn't afford. The meeting with Tara's buyers was tonight. He was supposed to bring 2 pounds of premium indoor to sell for $8,000. Instead, he had nothing except a trashed shed and a neighbor who wanted $4,000 to return what he'd stolen. Jace sat on an overturned bucket and tried to think. Carl had the weed, but Carl wasn't going anywhere. Ex-cons on parole didn't just disappear. They stayed put and followed rules and tried not to give the system reasons to send them back to prison. But stealing 2 pounds of weed from your neighbor probably violated several of those rules. The question was whether Jace could use that fact to get his product back, or whether Carl was counting on him being too scared to call the cops on his own illegal operation. Inside the trailer, Jace made coffee and tried to figure out his next move. Call Tara and cancel the meeting? Try to borrow $4,000 from somewhere. Wait for Carl to get careless and try to take the weed back by force. None of the options were good. But in Pine Ridge, good options were a luxury most people couldn't afford. His phone buzzed. Text message from Tara. Meeting confirmed for tonight. 9 p.m. Don't be late. Jace stared at the message for a long time. Tonight he was supposed to meet wholesale buyers who didn't waste time and didn't negotiate, and expected to see 2 pounds of premium product. Instead, he'd have to explain why he had nothing to sell and hope they didn't decide he was wasting their time. Or he could get his weed back from Carl. One way or another. He walked to the window and looked at Carl's trailer. The kitchen light was on again, and he could see the old con sitting at his table, probably drinking coffee and thinking about finder's fees and hypothetical merchandise. Carl had made one mistake. He'd stolen from somebody who had nothing left to lose and nobody to answer to. In Carl's world, that probably seemed like smart business. Take from the weak, sell to the desperate, pocket the difference. But Carl didn't know that Jace had a meeting tonight with people who made territorial dealers look like Sunday school teachers. People who expected him to deliver what he'd promised. People who might not appreciate finding out their new supplier couldn't protect his own product from a 50-year-old ex-con with a coffee habit. Jace finished his coffee and started planning. Tonight was going to be interesting, one way or another. Either he'd get his weed back and make the sale that would change everything, or he'd find out what happened when you disappointed people who didn't tolerate disappointment. But first, he had to deal with Carl. And Carl had no idea what was coming. Chapter 7. Jace drove his truck into the hills until the pavement turned to gravel and the gravel turned to a dirt track meant for logging trucks, not his beat-to-shit Ford Ranger. He had $537 to his name. $400 from Tommy Escobar's last buy, the rest scraped together from the ashtray and a jar in his trailer. Not enough to get his weed back from Carl, not enough to disappear. Just enough to start over, maybe. He passed a sign that said McKinleyville 15 miles and took the next unmarked turnoff, the truck groaning as it climbed. The air got cooler, smelling of damp earth and redwood. This was public land, mostly. National Forest territory crisscrossed with old mining claims and illegal grows that had been here since the 70s. You just had to find a spot that wasn't already taken. He found it 2 hours later. An old trapper's shack, maybe. Or a line cabin for rangers 100 years ago. It was half-rotted, the roof sagging in the middle, but the walls were solid redwood and the door still hung on its leather hinges. It was 100 yards off the dirt track, hidden by a stand of Douglas fir. Perfect. The grow shop kid in Eureka didn't ask questions when Jace walked in for the second time in 3 months. He just nodded, like he saw ghosts every day. Starting a new art project, the kid asked. Something like that, Jace said. He put his $500 on the counter. What'll this get me? The kid with the blessed tattoo counted the money. Not much. A single 400-watt lamp, a bag of soil, some cheap nutrients. Enough for 4, maybe 5 plants if you get lucky. I need power. Power's your problem. You got an outlet in your new studio. No outlets. The kid sighed, ran a hand over his shaved head. Solar then. But 500 won't get you a panel big enough to power a lamp. Maybe a fan, if you're lucky. He pushed 300 back across the counter. Buy the lamp and the soil. Figure out the power later. Or find a new hobby. Jace found the power that night. A state park campground 10 miles from the shack, full of RVs and families from Oregon on vacation. He waited until 2 in the morning, listening to the generators hum and the drunks sing around their campfires. He found what he was looking for outside a 30-foot Winnebago with Idaho plates. 2 big solar panels propped on an easel to catch the morning sun. They were hooked up to a battery array the size of a suitcase. He cut the cables with bolt cutters he'd boosted from a hardware store in Arcata. The panels were heavy, awkward. He had to make 2 trips, his heart pounding with every snapped twig under his boots. Nobody stirred. The drunks were passed out, and the families were dreaming of whatever people with Winnebagos dreamed about. He spent the next day setting up his new studio. The shack had 1 room, a dirt floor, and a window with no glass. He boarded up the window, ran the cables from the solar panels on the roof to the battery array in the corner. He hooked up the lamp, and a purple glow filled the dusty space. It felt different this time. Not like an art project. Like a bunker. Tara found him 3 days later. He didn't know how, but she showed up in her beat-up Civic, bouncing up the dirt track like she did this every day. Jesus, Jace. You weren't kidding about getting out of town, she said, looking at the shack. How'd you find me? Asked around. Tommy Escobar said you were heading for the hills. She stepped inside, wrinkled her nose at the smell of dirt and mildew. This is where the magic happens? This is it. The 5 plants he'd bought with his remaining cash were already in their pots, looking small and scared under the purple light. What happened to the old magic? The stuff you were supposed to sell my people? Jace didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to say Carl's name. Had a security problem. A security problem. Tara looked at him, her green eyes seeing more than he wanted them to. You mean somebody stole your shit? Yeah. Vic? No. The neighbor. Tara was quiet for a minute. The one I told you about. The ex-con. That's the one. She shook her head, not in pity, but in a way that said she'd expected this all along. So, what are you going to do? Start over. Sell to your people when this is ready. That's 2 months from now. They're not going to wait. They'll have to. She walked over to him, stood close enough that he could smell the bar on her clothes. You know, for a guy who just lost everything, you seem pretty calm. I'm not calm. No, she said. I guess you're not. She kissed him then, hard. It wasn't like before. It was rougher, more desperate. They ended up on his sleeping bag in the corner, the purple light from the grow lamp painting stripes across their bodies. It was quick and ugly and necessary. Afterward, she lay on her back, staring at the decaying roof. This isn't going to work, you know, she said. What isn't? This. Hiding up here. Thinking you can just grow a new batch and everything will be fine. What other choice do I have? You could have paid Carl. With what? You could have talked to me. My people might have fronted you the cash to solve your security problem. For a percentage. Jace sat up. You never said that. You never asked. She started pulling her clothes back on. They like you. Or they like the idea of you. A new guy, independent, no crew. It's a good investment. Tell them I'll be ready in 8 weeks. I'll tell them, she said, buttoning her jeans. But don't be surprised if they find another investment before then. She stood by the door, looked back at him. And Jace. Don't let your new security problem find out where you are. He was checking the battery charge when he heard the noise. A cough. Close by. Jace grabbed the crowbar he'd been using to pry rotten boards off the wall. He moved to the door, listening. A man's voice, talking to a dog. Easy, boy. Just seeing what's up here. Jace stepped out of the shack, crowbar held low at his side. The man was 50, maybe 60. Dressed in hiking gear, LL Bean boots, fleece vest, a walking stick. He had a golden retriever on a leash. A tourist lost. This is private property, Jace said. The hiker jumped. Oh. Sorry. I didn't see any signs. There don't need to be signs. The man looked at the shack, at the blacked-out window, at the solar panels glinting on the roof. He wasn't stupid. He knew what he was looking at. Right, the hiker said, taking a step back. My mistake. We'll just be on our way. The dog whined, pulling at the leash. You do that, Jace said. He took a step toward the hiker. The crowbar felt heavy in his hand. Solid. Look, man, I don't want any trouble, the hiker said, holding up his hands. His eyes were wide now. Scared. I didn't see anything. What didn't you see? Anything. The shack. The equipment. I'm just out for a walk with my dog. You walked a long way off the main trail. Got turned around. It happens. Jace watched him, thinking. The man would go back to his car, drive down to McKinleyville, have a beer at the sports bar. He'd tell his wife, his buddies. You won't believe what I saw up in the hills today. The story would get around. Cops, other growers, Vic's people. Someone would come looking. Get out of here, Jace said. Right. We're going. The hiker turned, pulling the dog with him. He was trying not to run. Jace took 2 quick steps and shoved him hard in the middle of his back. The man stumbled, fell to his knees. The dog barked, a high panic sound. And don't come back, Jace said, his voice low. The hiker scrambled to his feet, grabbed the leash, and half ran, half stumbled back toward the dirt track, not looking back. Jace watched him go, the crowbar still tight in his hand. The fear on the man's face had been real. Satisfying. He stood there for a long time, listening to the hiker's footsteps fade, until the only sound was the wind in the trees and the quiet hum of stolen electricity powering his new life. This was how it had to be. No witnesses. No loose ends. No coincidences. He'd learned that much from Carl. He went back inside the shack and checked on his 5 little plants. They were still there, reaching for the light. Chapter 8. The next 7 weeks passed in a silent routine of sunlight and darkness. Jace lived by the charge in the battery array. On sunny days, he had power to spare. When the coastal fog rolled in, thick and gray, he'd turn off the lamp for a few hours, sitting in the half-dark of the shack, listening to the drip of condensation from the redwoods, eating cold beans from a can. He got thin. His face got hard. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't have to. The 5 plants loved the attention. They grew thick and fast, their leaves a deep, healthy green. The isolation was good for them. No neighbors, no drama. Just the steady purple hum of the lamp and the clean hill air. It wasn't enough, though. 5 plants, maybe 1.5 pounds of finished product if he was lucky. It was a start, but it wasn't a business. He made another trip to the grow shop in Eureka, the blessed kid behind the counter barely looking up. Jace bought 5 more starter plants and another bag of Fox Farm soil with the last of his cash. He told the kid he was expanding his art installation. The kid just shrugged. Whatever, man. Just don't bring the cops here. He set up the new plants in the other corner of the shack. 10 of them now. The single lamp struggled to cover them all. The battery array died twice as fast. Jace started running the lamp only 12 hours a day, hoping it was enough. The harvest came in a wave. The first 5 plants were ready a week before the second batch. He spent 2 days trimming, his fingers sticky with resin, the smell so strong it made his head spin. He hung the branches from the rafters, a curtain of green possibility. The yield was better than he'd thought. Close to 3 pounds from all 10 plants. It was real weight. Real money. He didn't call Tara. Her people were a problem for another day. He needed a buyer who was local, quiet, and didn't ask questions about where the product came from. He found him through one of the trimmers he'd met briefly last season, a girl with dreadlocks who knew everyone. The buyer's name was Silas. He ran product for a dispensary down in Garberville that was always looking for off-the-books inventory. They met in the parking lot of a bait and tackle shop on the edge of the Eel River. Silas was not what Jace expected. He was in his late 20s, clean-cut, driving a newish Subaru. He looked like he should be selling insurance. "You're Jace," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "You're Silas." "Let's see it." Jace opened the cooler in the back of his truck. Inside was a vacuum-sealed bag with exactly 1 pound of his best buds. Silas picked it up, examined it through the plastic. He didn't open it. "Looks good," he said. He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. 3,000. As discussed. Jace took the envelope, fanned the bills. Hundreds. Clean and crisp. "You got more of this?" Silas asked, putting the cooler in his Subaru. "Maybe. My guy will take everything you can grow. Same price, same quality." "How do I find you?" "You don't." Silas got into his car. "I'll find you. The girl with the dreads knows how to get a message to you." He started the engine. "And kid, don't get greedy. Don't get sloppy. There's a lot of money to be made if you just do your job and keep your head down." Jace watched the Subaru drive off, the envelope of cash feeling heavy in his hand. $3,000. He had 2 more pounds drying in the shack. 6,000 more waiting for him. He was back in the game. His first stop was a pawn shop on the bad side of Eureka. The guy behind the counter had a face like a collapsed road map and a name tag that said Earl. "I need something for protection," Jace said. "Out in the woods. Bears and whatnot." Earl laughed, a dry rattling sound. "Bears?" He looked Jace up and down. "What kind of bears we talking about? The four-legged kind or the two-legged kind? The kind that don't listen to reason." "Right." Earl disappeared into the back and came back with a cardboard box. He pulled out a pistol, laid it on a piece of felt on the counter. It was a Smith & Wesson M&P, matte black polymer used but clean. 9mm. Holds 17 in the mag. "Reliable," Earl said. "Come with 2 magazines and a holster. $450. Jace picked it up. It was heavier than he'd expected. Cold and solid. The weight of it felt good. It felt like an answer. "You need a background check for that," Earl said, watching him. "I need it today." Earl sighed. "Private sale fee is another $100. And you ain't never been in this shop. We clear." "We're clear." Jace paid him in cash from the envelope. $600 for the gun, an extra box of hollow point rounds, and Earl's forgetfulness. He walked out of the shop with the pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans, the cold steel pressing against his skin. He felt safer than he had in months. He went to the Rusty Pelican that night. He wanted a beer that wasn't warm, and a burger that wasn't cooked over a can of Sterno. The bar was half empty. Tara was behind the counter, polishing glasses. She saw him walk in, and her face went tight. "Look what the cat dragged in," she said. "Just wanted a beer." "We got beer." She pulled him a draft, her movements jerky. "Heard you were back in business." News travels fast. Especially when it's bad news. She leaned closer, her voice low. "Vic knows." Jace took a sip of his beer. It tasted like victory. "Knows what?" "He knows somebody is set up in the hills off the Blue Lake Road. He knows they're running solar panels. He knows they're moving product." The hiker. The guy with the golden retriever had talked after all. "How's he know all that?" Jace asked, keeping his voice even. "How do you think? People talk. Vic pays them to talk to him first." She wiped down a clean spot on the bar. "He's not happy, Jace. You're in his backyard, and you didn't ask permission. He thinks you're laughing at him." "I'm not laughing." "Doesn't matter what you're doing. It matters what he thinks." She looked at him, her eyes tired. "He's going to come looking for you." Jace finished his beer. He thought about the pistol in his truck, tucked under the driver's seat. He thought about the 2 pounds of weed hanging in the shack, another $6,000 waiting for him. He wasn't the same kid who'd gotten his shed cleaned out by Carl. "Let him come," Jace said. Tara shook her head slowly. "You think you're tough now? Because you're living in a shack and eating out of cans. Vic's been doing this since you were in diapers. He's buried people in those hills. I can take care of myself." "Can you?" She looked at him, a flicker of something like pity in her eyes. "I hope so. For your sake." He left a 20 on the bar and walked out, not looking back. The night air was cool. He drove back toward the hills, the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. He felt good. The money, the successful sale, the weight of the gun. He felt like he was finally in control. Tara's warning was just noise. Vic was a problem for another day. Back at the shack, he sat on an overturned bucket and cleaned the Smith & Wesson by the light of a single bulb running off the battery. He field stripped it the way he'd seen in a video online, wiping down the slide, the barrel, the recoil spring. He loaded both magazines, the copper-jacketed hollow points clicking into place one by one. He was a businessman now. He had a product, a buyer, and a plan. And now, he had protection. He racked the slide, chambering around. The sound was loud in the small shack. Final. Vic Torrance could come looking. Let him. Jace was ready. He laid the pistol on his sleeping bag and looked at his 10 plants, their leaves shimmering in the purple light. They were his. All of it. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him again. Chapter 9. The second sail to Silas was even smoother than the first. They met in the same bait shop parking lot. This time, Jace brought the remaining 2 pounds. Silas didn't even get out of his Subaru. He just popped the trunk. Jace put the cooler inside, and Silas passed a fat manila envelope through the window. $6,000. My guy's happy, Silas said, his eyes hidden behind a pair of expensive sunglasses. He wants to know when you'll have more. A couple of months, Jace said. Good. Keep it consistent. Silas put the car in gear. The dreadlock girl. You know the one? Yeah. She'll call you when we're ready. Don't try to find me before then. The Subaru pulled out onto the highway and disappeared. Jace had $9,000 in a manila envelope. More money than he'd ever held. He drove back to Eureka, the Smith & Wesson tucked under his seat, feeling like he owned the whole goddamn county. He wasn't a trailer park kid anymore. He was a producer. A businessman. He needed to go back. Back to Pine Ridge. He'd left a box of tools in the shed. A good socket set, a drill. Things he'd need if he was going to make the shack more permanent. It felt stupid to buy them again when he had $9 grand in the truck, but it felt even more stupid to have left them there in the first place. Pulling into the trailer park felt like visiting a foreign country. The same dusty lots, the same sad-looking mobile homes with their peeling paint and sagging porches. Mrs. Kowalski was watering a pot of dead geraniums. She didn't look up. Carl's trailer was still there, a motorcycle frame covered by a blue tarp in the front yard. Jace hadn't seen or heard from him since the day Carl had cleaned out his shed. Jace had just disappeared. He wondered if Carl thought he'd scared him off for good. The thought was satisfying. He parked in his old spot and walked to the shed. The door was still broken, hanging off one hinge. Inside, it was just an empty metal box smelling of dust. His toolbox was in the corner where he'd left it, under a pile of trash. He picked it up and turned to leave. A black Chevy pickup truck was blocking him in. It was clean, polished, the kind of truck a contractor or a foreman would drive. A big man was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed. He was tall, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a shaved head and a calm, patient look on his face. He wore a clean flannel shirt and new-looking jeans. Jace saw the scar on his left hand, a pale, jagged line running from his thumb to his wrist. Vic Torrance. Vic didn't say anything. He just watched Jace walk toward him, the toolbox in his hand. 2 other guys were in the truck, shadows behind the tinted glass. You're Jace, Vic said. His voice was quiet, lower than Jace had expected. Depends who's asking. Jace stopped 10 feet away. His own truck was boxed in. The Smith & Wesson was under the driver's seat. A long way away. I'm Vic. He said it like it should mean something. We need to have a conversation. I'm busy. Vic smiled, but it was just his mouth moving. His eyes stayed flat and cold. You don't look busy. You look like a kid who came back to get his toys. He pushed off the truck and took a step closer. You've been busy though, haven't you? Up in the hills. So Tara was right. He knew everything. I don't know what you're talking about, Jace said. The lie felt thin in the afternoon sun. Yeah, you do, Vic said. You're the art project. The one with the solar panels. The one who's been selling product to Silas down in Garberville. Jace's blood went cold. He knew about Silas. That's my territory, kid, Vic said, his voice still quiet, reasonable. Everything that grows in these hills, everything that sells, it goes through me. Or I get a piece. That's the rule. I'm just a small operation, Jace said, trying to sound young and stupid. A few plants for personal. Sell a little on the side to make rent. You sold 3 pounds to Silas in the last 2 weeks. That's not personal. That's business. Vic took another step. He smelled faintly of soap and motor oil. And you're doing business in my office without paying for the desk. The passenger door of the Chevy opened. A wiry guy with meth-pocked skin got out, a tire iron in his hand. He didn't look at Jace, just leaned against the truck, tapping the iron against his leg. Look, Jace said, raising his hands, the toolbox feeling ridiculously heavy. I didn't know the rules. I'm new to this. You're not new, Vic said. You're just stupid. Or you think I am. He stopped right in front of Jace, close enough for Jace to see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. You think because you're hiding up in some shack, you're invisible? Nothing in this county is invisible to me. The pressure was immense. Vic was a wall of muscle and menace. Jace could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. The $9,000 in his truck felt like it was on fire. So what do you want? Jace asked. What do I want? Vic seemed to consider this. I want respect. I want people to follow the rules. And I want my cut. How much is your cut? 20%, Vic said. On everything you grow. Retroactive. You sold $9,000 worth of product to Silas. You owe me $1,800. Today. Jace thought about the money in the envelope. Giving Vic $1,800 would hurt, but it was better than getting beaten with a tire iron in the middle of Pine Ridge Mobile Home Park. And if I pay? Jace asked. If you pay, I let you keep operating. For now. You sell to Silas, you sell to whoever you want. But every time you do, I get my 20%. You bring it to me. In cash. No delays. And if I don't? Vic smiled that dead smile again. If you don't, my friend here with the tire iron is going to redecorate your truck. Then we're going to take a ride up to your little shack, and we're going to burn it to the ground. With your plants inside. And maybe with you inside, if you're still being stupid. The threat hung in the air, simple and absolute. This was the end of the game. He could pay and become one of Vic's guys, a small part of his operation. Or he could refuse and lose everything. Again. But Jace had another idea. A lie. A better one. I'm not working those hills anymore, Jace said, forcing himself to meet Vic's gaze. It's too hot. The hiker, he talked. Cops have been sniffing around. Vic's expression didn't change. So I'm done. I sold my last batch to Silas and I'm out. I was just grabbing my tools and leaving the county. It was a good lie. It explained why he was here, why he had cash, why he wouldn't be a problem anymore. It was a way to get Vic to walk away. Vic stared at him for a long, silent moment. Jace could hear Mrs. Kowalski's screen door slam shut. You're a terrible liar, kid, Vic said finally. But let's say I believe you. Let's say you're really packing it in. He glanced at the toolbox. You still owe me for the product you already moved. I don't have it, Jace lied again. I paid bills. Sent money home. It's gone. The wiry guy took a step forward, the tire iron raised slightly. Vic held up a hand, stopping him. He looked Jace up and down, a butcher sizing up a piece of meat. All right, Vic said, and the word surprised Jace. No more hills. You're done. I don't see you again. You don't grow here, you don't sell here. You disappear. That's the plan, Jace said, his throat dry. Good. Vic leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because if I hear your name again, if I hear about some mystery grower selling premium product to my buyers, I'm not going to come talk to you. I'm just going to come finish you. We clear? Clear, Jace managed to say. Vic stared at him for another second, then nodded once, a sharp final gesture. He turned and got back into his truck. The wiry guy gave Jace a last, hungry look before getting back in the passenger seat. The black Chevy started up, backed out, and drove slowly out of the trailer park, leaving Jace standing alone in the driveway, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He stood there until the truck was gone, until the dust settled. He was shaking. The toolbox felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He had lied his way out of it. He'd kept his $9,000. He'd kept his operation. He'd won. But as he walked to his truck, the feeling of victory curdled in his stomach. Vic hadn't believed him. He knew Vic hadn't believed him. He hadn't taken the money because it wasn't about the money. It was a test. He'd given Jace enough rope to hang himself. The pressure was back, 100 times worse than before. He had a face and a name now. He was on Vic's radar. Every sale he made, every move he took would be a gamble. He'd bought himself some time, but he'd also started a clock ticking. And he had no idea when it would run out. He threw the toolbox in the back of the Ranger, got in and locked the doors. The Smith & Wesson was still under the seat. It didn't feel like an answer anymore. It felt like a stupid, useless piece of metal. Chapter 10. The fear from the meeting with Vic lasted for 3 days. Jace stayed in the shack, the Smith & Wesson never more than an arm's length away, jumping at every snapped twig or rustle of leaves. He ate cold food and drank lukewarm water from a jug, watching the dirt track through a crack in the wall, expecting to see the black Chevy roll up at any moment. But it never came. The silence of the woods pressed in, and the fear slowly burned down into a low, simmering anger. Vic hadn't taken his money. He hadn't burned his shack. He just talked. Jace had let him talk his way into his head, let him turn $9,000 of success into a mouthful of ash. He'd let Vic win without throwing a punch. The anger was fuel. He drove the Ranger into town, to the grow shop. The blessed kid was on the phone, talking about vape cartridges. Jace threw $3,000 in cash on the counter. "I need more lights," Jace said. "More solar panels. Another battery array. Fans. Everything you've got." The kid hung up the phone. He looked at the cash, then at Jace's face. For the first time, he didn't make a joke about art projects. "Going professional?" the kid asked. "Something like that." He spent the next 2 weeks turning the shack into a proper grow room. He ran the new solar panels in a series, doubling his power. He installed 2 more LED lamps, bathing the entire room in an intense shadowless purple light. He put in oscillating fans to circulate the air and a carbon filter on the exhaust vent to scrub the smell. He bought 20 starter plants, lining them up in neat rows. The shack was crowded now, humming with electricity, smelling of plastic and ozone and rich soil. It was no longer a hideout. It was a factory. The work pushed the fear away. Every screw he drove, every wire he connected was an act of defiance. Vic thought he'd scared him out of the business. He was doubling down. He'd get so big so fast that by the time Vic realized he hadn't quit, Jace would be gone. Cashed out and on a beach somewhere, leaving Vic to choke on his 20%. The plants grew with an explosive energy, thriving in the controlled environment. He harvested the next crop in record time, working for 36 hours straight, fueled by caffeine pills and beef jerky. The yield was staggering. Almost 4 pounds of dense trichome-covered buds. His biggest haul by far. The problem was Silas. Vic knew about Silas. Going back to him was a death sentence. He needed a new buyer. Tara showed up a week later, her Civic rattling up the track, a plume of dust behind it. She found him weighing the finished product into 1-pound bags on a digital scale. "Jesus, Jace," she said, stepping into the humid, buzzing room. "You went all in. It's the only way to play." She looked around at the setup, at the new rows of young plants already reaching for the lights. I told you Vic was watching. This isn't keeping your head down. This is winning, Jace said, not looking up from the scale. You said your people might be interested in an investment. Is that offer still good? My people got spooked when you disappeared. They don't like drama. There's no drama. Just product. He sealed another bag. I've got 3 pounds ready to go. Premium. You want your 10% or not? She watched him for a minute, the way he moved with a new, sharp-edged confidence. He wasn't the same kid she'd found hiding out here 2 months ago. I know a guy, she said finally. Runs a dispensary in Arcata. One of the ones that's always short on inventory because their legal supply chain is a joke. He pays cash, and he doesn't care where it comes from as long as it's clean. Set it up. He's careful. He won't meet you. He sends a driver. And he pays $3,000 a pound, take it or leave it. That's what Silas was paying. It's the going rate for guys like you, she said. Independent. Unreliable. Risky. Jace sealed the last bag and stacked them in a cooler. 3 pounds. $9,000. Minus Tara's $900. It was still more money than he knew what to do with. They met the driver in the parking lot of the Arcata Co-op, surrounded by Subarus with Coexist bumper stickers. The driver was a woman, mid-40s, who looked like a high school librarian. She took the cooler, handed Tara an envelope, and left without a word. Tara counted the money in the front seat of her car, then peeled off $900 and handed the rest to Jace. See, he said, the thick stack of bills feeling solid and real in his hand. No drama. You got lucky. She put her cut in her purse. What's the next move? You can't keep tempting fate up there. Vic's not going to just forget about you. I'm going legit, Jace said. The idea had been growing in his mind for weeks. It was the perfect solution. The final move in the game. Tara laughed. What? I'm going to get a license. A real one. Buy some land, put up a real greenhouse. Do it all by the book. With what money? The cash you're holding right now? She shook her head. Jace, you can't just walk into the county office with a bag of drug money and ask for a permit. That's not how it works. They have accountants. They ask questions. I'll figure it out. Wash it somehow. He'd heard the term before. It sounded simple enough. You've been watching too many movies, she said. But she was looking at him differently now. The crazy confidence, the money, the plan, it was stupid, but it was something. It was more than anyone else she knew had. Come back to the shack with me, he said. Why? Celebrate. The hookup was like the last time, fueled by a reckless, frantic energy. It wasn't about connection. It was about the friction, the temporary oblivion. Afterwards, they lay on the sleeping bag, the hum of the fans filling the silence. He's still asking about you, Tara said quietly into the darkness. Who? Vic. He came into the bar last week. Asked if I'd seen the trailer park kid. The one who disappeared. Jace felt a cold prickle on his skin, but he pushed it away. He was winning. Vic was old news. What did you say? I told him I hadn't seen you in months. Told him I heard you went back to Arizona. He believed you. I don't know, she said. He just smiled and said, things have a way of turning up. Then he left. Jace sat up. The shack suddenly felt small, flimsy. The hum of the fans sounded like a ticking clock. Vic knew. He was just waiting. You need to get out, Jace, Tara said, her voice serious. Take your money and just go. Colorado, Oregon. Anywhere but here. No. The word was hard. Final. I'm not running. I'm building something. I'm almost there. He was lying to her. He was lying to himself. He wasn't building anything. He was just hiding, running a machine that spat out cash. But the cash was the only thing that felt real. After Tara left, Jace took the $6,000 from his new sale and drove back to the grow shop. The blessed kid was stocking shelves. Jace didn't even say hello. "I need 20 more," he said. The kid looked at the new stacks of pots, the bags of soil. "You're gonna run out of room, man." "I'll make more room." Back at the shack, he crammed the new plants into every available space, their leaves brushing up against each other. The place was a jungle of green and purple, choked with wiring and humming equipment. He felt a surge of power, looking at it all. This was his kingdom. His fortress. He was untouchable. He cranked the fans to full blast, the roar of the motors drowning out the silence of the woods, drowning out the sound of Vic's voice in his head. He was unstoppable. Chapter 11. The shack was getting small. The 40 young plants were packed so tight their leaves were fighting for light, and the air was thick with the humid smell of growth and electricity. The constant hum of the fans and the carbon filter was a sound that lived in Jace's bones now. He hadn't slept for more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. He was rich, he was a producer, and he was living like a mole in a hole, eating protein bars and shitting in a bucket. He needed a night off. One night in a real bed. A hot shower that wasn't from a solar bag hanging off a tree. He felt untouchable, insulated by his cash and the roar of his equipment. Vic was a ghost, a story Tara told to keep him on edge. The real world was here, in the hum and the heat and the steady relentless growth. He drove the Ranger back to Pine Ridge after dark. The trailer felt strange, hollowed out and dead. The air was stale. He turned on the lights, the water heater. He stood under the shower for 20 minutes, the hot water stinging his skin, washing away days of dirt and sweat. He threw on a clean t-shirt and a pair of gym shorts. He opened a beer from the back of the fridge. It was warm, but it tasted like civilization. He put the Smith & Wesson on the nightstand next to the bed, the way a man puts out a glass of water. A habit. Then he fell into the lumpy mattress and was asleep in seconds, the silence of the trailer a deafening roar after the noise of the shack. The sound that woke him wasn't loud. A scrape. A floorboard groaning under a weight that wasn't his. Jace was awake instantly, his heart a cold fist in his chest. His first thought was Vic. He didn't move. He listened. A shuffling sound from the kitchen. A drawer opening, then another. A muttered curse. The voice was thin, reedy. Not Vic. He reached out, his fingers closing around the cool polymer grip of the pistol. He slipped out of bed, his bare feet silent on the cheap linoleum. He stayed low, using the darkness of the hallway as cover. He could see a shape in the kitchen, silhouetted against the weak moonlight coming through the window. A man, thin and twitchy, moving with the jerky, unnatural speed of a tweaker. He was rummaging through the junk drawer, his movements frantic. Looking for cash, for anything he could sell. The man turned, and the moonlight caught the blade of a steak knife in his hand. He hadn't found it in the drawer, he'd brought it with him. He froze when he saw Jace standing in the hall, a dark shape holding a darker shape. "Oh man," the tweaker whispered, his voice cracking. "Easy. I thought nobody was home." Jace didn't say anything. The pistol was steady in his hand. He'd imagined this moment 100 times, but always with Vic's face on the other end. This was nothing. This was a stray dog, a rat in the walls. "I'm leaving, okay," the tweaker said, taking a half step back. He held the steak knife up, a pathetic ward against the darkness. No trouble. He lunged. It wasn't a real attack. It was a panicked, stupid move, a cornered animal trying to bolt. He came forward with the knife held out in front of him, his eyes wide with chemical terror. Jace didn't think. He didn't aim. He brought the gun up and fired. The sound was apocalyptic in the small trailer. A single, deafening explosion that blew out the silence and filled the world with thunder. The flash lit up the tweaker's face for a split second, hollow cheeks, bad teeth, a look of stunned surprise. The man stumbled backward, his legs tangling. He hit the refrigerator with a hollow thud and slid to the floor. The steak knife clattered on the linoleum. He made a wet, gurgling sound, and then he was still. Silence rushed back in, ringing in Jace's ears. The smell of gunpowder was sharp, acrid. He stood there in the hallway, the gun still pointed at the heap on the floor. He could see the dark stain spreading across the man's chest, soaking into his greasy shirt. He was dead. Jace knew it with absolute certainty. He had just killed a man. He didn't feel remorse. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a vast, numb emptiness. The problem wasn't that he'd killed someone. The problem was that there was a dead body in his kitchen. A logistical problem. A mess. He lowered the gun. His hands were shaking, a fine tremor he couldn't control. Adrenaline. He took a deep breath, then another. He walked into the kitchen and nudged the man's leg with his foot. Nothing. Okay. First things first. He needed to get the body out of here. He couldn't call the cops. A 19-year-old kid with an illegal gun and a history of dealing, shooting an intruder. They'd lock him up and throw away the key. He found a dusty tarp in the shed outside, the same one he'd used to move his first harvest. He laid it out on the kitchen floor. The man was light, shockingly so. A bag of bones held together with skin and desperation. Jace rolled him onto the tarp. It was a clumsy, awkward process. He tried not to look at the man's face, the open, surprised eyes. He got blood on his hands. He wiped it on his shorts. He wrapped the body in the tarp, a crude bundle. He had to clean the floor. He found bleach under the sink, a roll of paper towels. He scrubbed at the pool of blood, the smell of bleach and iron filling the small space. He was methodical, detached. This was just another mess to clean up. Dragging the body was the hardest part. He pulled it out the back door, across the patch of weedy grass behind the trailer. It was heavy now, an anchor of dead weight. He heaved it into the bed of the Ranger, grunting with the effort. He threw a pile of old moving blankets over it. He drove out of Pine Ridge, the sky beginning to turn a pale pre-dawn gray. He took the back roads toward the Mad River, heading for a spot he knew, a deep ditch and a wash where people dumped old tires and washing machines. It was a place for things no one wanted to see again. He backed the truck up to the edge of the ditch. He unwrapped the body from the tarp, rolling it over the side. It tumbled down the embankment, coming to rest among the rusted metal and broken glass. Just more trash. He threw the bloody tarp in after it. He drove away without looking back. When he got back to the trailer, the sun was up. The place still smelled of bleach and gunpowder. He saw a smear of blood on the doorframe he'd missed. He scrubbed it furiously. He gathered his things, the few clothes he had here, his toothbrush. He couldn't stay here again. Ever. His phone buzzed. A text from Tara. "You okay? Haven't heard from you." He was about to text back when he heard her car pull up. He froze. She couldn't see this. She couldn't know. She knocked, then used the key he'd given her months ago. The door swung open. She was holding a coffee carrier. "Hey," she said, her smile faltering as she took in the scene. Jace standing in the middle of the room, looking wild-eyed and pale. The faint, sharp smell of bleach. "What's going on? Are you cleaning?" Something like that. Her eyes moved around the room, seeing everything. She was a bartender. She knew how to read a room, how to see what was wrong. Her gaze fell on the floor, on a spot near the refrigerator that was too clean, unnaturally pale compared to the grimy linoleum around it. Then she saw the dark, reddish-brown stain on the cuff of his gym shorts. She didn't ask. Her face went blank, all expression wiped away. She put the coffee on the counter, very carefully. "I have to get to work," she said, her voice flat. She backed out of the trailer, not turning her back to him. Her silence was a wall between them. It was heavier than any accusation could ever be. After she was gone, Jace took the Smith & Wesson and drove back into the hills. Not to the shack. He went deeper into the woods, to a place where a creek cut through a ravine. He dug a hole in the soft earth beneath the roots of a giant redwood, wrapped the pistol in an oil rag, and buried it. He stood up, his hands covered in dirt. The gun was gone. The body was gone. The money was safe. He had solved the problem. But as he walked back to his truck, the silence of the woods felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was watching. Chapter 12. The quiet in the woods wasn't quiet anymore. Jace heard the dead tweaker in the hum of the fans, saw his surprised eyes in the purple glow of the lamps. He heard Vic's voice in the wind, a low whisper promising to come finish him. He heard Tara's silence, the loudest sound of all. He'd buried the gun, but the hole it left was still there. He'd solved a problem, but the solution had multiplied, breeding new problems in the dark. He couldn't stay in the shack. The walls were pressing in. He needed noise, motion, something other than the steady, relentless growth of his 40 plants and the louder growth of the paranoia in his head. He drove without thinking, the Ranger eating up the miles of two-lane blacktop between the coast and the valley. He ended up at the Rusty Pelican. He didn't know why. Maybe to see if Tara would talk to him. Maybe to prove to himself that he could still walk into a normal place and be a normal person. The bar was mostly empty. A couple of old loggers nursing beers and watching a fishing show on the TV. Tara was at the far end of the bar, wiping it down with a rag. She looked up when he came in, and her face went perfectly, professionally blank. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked through him, like he was a pane of dirty glass. "What do you want, Jace?" she asked. Her voice was flat, tired. The voice she used for drunks she was about to cut off. "Just a beer." She pulled a draft and set it in front of him. Her hand didn't linger. She moved back down the bar, started refilling the salt shakers, her back to him. The message was clear. They were done. Whatever they'd had, the desperate hookups, the business arrangement, the thin thread of shared survival was gone. He had scrubbed it away with bleach and buried it with a gun he hadn't been smart enough to keep. He drank the beer in 3 long swallows. It didn't help. The ghosts were still there, sitting on the stools next to him. He put a 10 on the bar and walked out. He drove again, aimlessly, until he found himself turning into Pine Ridge Mobile Home Park. He didn't know why he was here either. A morbid curiosity, maybe. A need to look at the place where everything had gone wrong. The trailer looked the same. A sad, forgotten box. He imagined the police had been there, yellow tape across the door, asking neighbors about the transient who'd gone missing. But there was nothing. No tape. No cops. Nobody cared about one more tweaker vanishing from the face of the earth. He had created a ghost that only he could see. Then he saw Carl. The old con was sitting on his porch steps, drinking a beer in the late afternoon sun. He'd put on weight. He looked comfortable, content. He saw Jace's truck, and a slow, smug smile spread across his face. He lifted his beer bottle in a mock toast. And something in Jace's head snapped. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical event, a wire pulling taut and breaking. All the pressure from Vic, from the dead man, from Tara's cold shoulder, from the crushing weight of his own stupid decisions, found a direction. It aimed itself at the smiling man on the porch. Carl was the beginning of it all. The one who'd pushed him into the hills. The one who'd laughed at him. He was a problem Jace could touch. A problem he could solve. Jace put the truck in park, but left the engine running. He got out. He walked past his own trailer, toward a pile of junk by the fence line where someone had dumped the guts of a bathroom remodel. A toilet, a smashed sink, and a length of galvanized steel pipe about 2 feet long threaded on one end. It felt heavy in his hand. Perfect. Carl was still smiling, watching him approach. He didn't get up. He thought this was a conversation. "Well, look who's back," Carl said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Decide you missed the neighborhood?" Jace didn't answer. He walked up the 2 short steps to the porch. He swung the pipe. The first blow was clumsy, all rage and no technique. It caught Carl on the shoulder with a wet, solid crunch. The beer bottle flew from his hand, shattering on the concrete. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of stupid shock. "Hey!" he yelled, trying to scramble to his feet. Jace swung again, a level horizontal arc, putting his hips into it. The pipe connected with Carl's knee. There was a sharp crack, like a branch breaking, and Carl screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and disbelief. He collapsed sideways, clutching his leg. "You crazy?" Carl gasped, trying to crab walk backward. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Jace stood over him. He was breathing hard, his knuckles white on the pipe. He could see it all clearly now. This was what you did with problems. You didn't talk to them. You didn't pay them. You broke them until they couldn't hurt you anymore. He felt a profound, terrible calm settle over him. He raised the pipe and brought it down on Carl's other knee. Another crack. Another scream. He swung at his arm, his ribs, his hand. Methodical. Breaking things. The sound was rhythmic, ugly. The pipe, then the impact, then Carl's ragged, choking sob. A car door slammed. Jace looked up, blinking, as if coming out of a dream. Tara's Civic was parked 10 feet away, the driver's door wide open. She was standing there, her phone in one hand, her face a mask of pale, frozen horror. She must have followed him from the bar. Worried. She stared at him, at the pipe in his hand, at the bloody, broken thing on the porch that used to be Carl Brennan. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Jace looked from her to Carl, then back to her. The calm was gone, replaced by a raw, buzzing panic. He hadn't just broken Carl. He had broken the last link to any kind of normal life. He had done it in front of the one person who might have still seen something human in him. He dropped the pipe. It clanged on the concrete steps. He looked at Tara one last time, saw the fear and revulsion in her eyes, and knew it was over. All of it. He turned, walked past her without a word, got into his still-running truck and drove away, leaving her standing there with the broken man and the wreckage of who he used to be. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He already knew what he would see. Chapter 13. Jace drove. The engine of the Ranger was a dull roar that did nothing to drown out the image of Tara's face, pale and frozen in the late afternoon light. The pipe dropping from his hand. The wet, broken sound Carl had made. He drove past the turnoff to his shack, stayed on the 2-lane highway heading south. He had nowhere to go, but he couldn't stop. To stop was to let the ghosts in the passenger seat start talking. An hour later, he was low on gas. The needle was kissing E. He pulled into a cracked asphalt lot under a flickering sign that said gas and sip. It was one of those places that clung to the edge of the highway, selling cheap gas, stale jerky, and bootleg cigarettes to people on their way to somewhere worse. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and orange across the sky behind the redwoods. He was at the pump. The nozzle clicked into the filler neck, watching the numbers spin. He felt exposed under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the station's awning. Every passing car on the highway was a threat. Every shadow held a shape he didn't want to see. A black Chevy pickup pulled into the lot. Clean, polished, sitting high on its suspension. It didn't block him, just rolled quietly to the opposite pump. Vic Torrance got out of the driver's side. He didn't look at Jace. He moved with a calm, unhurried air, like a man who owned every piece of ground he stood on. He unscrewed his gas cap, slid his credit card into the machine. Just a guy getting gas. Evening, Vic said, his voice casual, carrying easily in the quiet lot. Jace didn't answer. He watched the numbers on the pump climb. $15. 16. Heard there was some excitement over at Pine Ridge, Vic said, still not looking at him. He leaned against his truck, arms crossed. Neighborly dispute, I hear. The pump clicked off. Jace pulled the nozzle out, gas dripping on the toe of his boot. He screwed his own cap on. He could get in his truck. He could drive away. Vic wasn't blocking him. I don't know what you're talking about, Jace said. Vic finally turned his head. He smiled, that same dead-eyed smile from the trailer park. Yeah, you do. You know all about it. Seems a certain ex-con had a bad fall. A real bad one. Funny thing is, a girl I know saw the whole thing. A bartender. Pretty little thing, but she gets hysterical. Called 911, screaming about a pipe. Tara. She'd called the cops. The world tilted under Jace's feet. She's a liar, Jace said, the words feeling like sand in his mouth. Is she? Vic said. Maybe. People lie all the time. You lie all the time. You told me you were quitting the business. You told me you were leaving the county. Both lies. He pushed off his truck and walked around the pumps, stopping a few feet from Jace. He smelled clean like soap. You're a mess, kid. You're sloppy. You leave witnesses. You draw attention. And attention is bad for my business. Jace stood his ground. He could feel the weight of all his mistakes pressing down on him. The dead tweaker. The buried gun. Carl, broken on his porch. Tara's face. What do you want? Jace asked. What I want, Vic said, his voice dropping, becoming confidential like they were partners discussing a deal, is for the noise to stop. The cops are asking questions about Carl. They're asking questions about you. The girl gave them your name. They start poking around Pine Ridge. They might start asking about your old trailer. Might find out about the other guy. The one who disappeared a few weeks back. Jace's blood went cold. He knew. He had to know. You're drawing heat, and it's drifting my way, Vic continued. That costs money to fix. It costs me time. It costs me peace of mind. So you want your 20%, Jace said. Vic laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor. The 20% deal is over. That was for a quiet, professional kid who knew how to keep his head down. That's not you. You're a liability. You're a fire that's about to get out of control. He took a step closer. So here's the new deal. A fine. A penalty for being stupid. $5,000. In cash. You bring it to me tomorrow. 5,000. Consider it a consultation fee. For teaching you a lesson. And for my silence. Your silence about what? About a certain grow-op in the hills I happen to know the location of. About a certain kid whose name the cops are very interested in right now. Vic's eyes were hard. You pay me the $5,000, and I forget everything. I forget your name. I forget where your shack is. I make a call to a friend of mine in the sheriff's department, and the questions about Carl Brennan's unfortunate accident start to fade away. The investigation stalls. You get to keep breathing. The offer hung in the air, smelling of gasoline and threats. Jace knew it was a lie. He could pay the $5,000, and Vic would be back for 10 a month later. This wasn't a one-time fee. It was a leash. But he had no choice. Not here. Not now. Okay, Jace said, his voice flat. Tomorrow. Noon, Vic said. The turnout on Highway 299, the one overlooking the river. You know it. Jace nodded. Don't be late, Vic said. And don't be stupid again. You've run out of chances. Vic walked back to his truck, finished pumping his gas, and got in. He didn't give Jace another look. He just drove out of the station and headed north, disappearing into the twilight. Jace stood there for a full minute, the noise of the highway traffic washing over him. He got into the Ranger. He had the money. He had more than $5,000 stashed at the shack. He could pay him. He could buy himself out of this corner. But he thought of Carl sitting on his porch, smug and satisfied, before the pipe came down. Paying people didn't work. Showing weakness didn't work. There was only one way to make a problem go away for good. He drove south for 10 miles, then pulled off onto a side road and killed the lights. He couldn't go back to the shack. Not now. Vic knew where it was. Tara knew where it was. It was a trap. The Ranger was a trap too. Tara had given the cops his name, probably his truck description. He drove to the outskirts of Arcata, to the vast dying parking lot of a Kmart that had closed down years ago. He parked the Ranger in a dark corner between a shipping container and a dumpster. He wiped down the steering wheel, the door handle, the gear shift with the tail of his t-shirt. He left the keys in the ignition. He walked away without looking back. He was on foot now, just another shadow in a town full of them. He walked for an hour, deeper into the residential streets, past dark houses where families were watching TV, eating dinner, living lives that were no longer possible for him. He was looking for a car. Something boring. Something invisible. He found it on a quiet cul-de-sac. A 20-year-old Honda Accord, faded green, a small crack in the windshield. The kind of car you saw every day and never noticed. He used the Slim Jim he'd bought months ago and kept in his wallet to pop the lock. He slid inside. The car smelled like stale coffee and old newspapers. He pulled the plastic from under the steering column, found the wires he needed. He'd watched enough videos, talked to enough people. He stripped the wires with his teeth, twisted them together. The engine coughed, sputtered, and turned over. He pulled away from the curb, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, electrifying clarity. He was a car thief. He was a felon. He was a man with a plan. He wasn't going to the turnout on Highway 299 tomorrow. He was going to find Vic's house. He was going to watch him. And then, he was going to erase him. He was going to solve the problem. The real problem. The last problem. Chapter 14. The first thing Jace did in the stolen Honda was drive to a 24-hour Walmart. The parking lot was a sea of yellow light, dotted with RVs and cars holding sleeping families. He walked in like he belonged there, another night owl buying motor oil and tube socks. He bought a cheap prepaid burner phone, a shovel from the gardening section, a 5-gallon gas can, a box of kitchen knives, and a 55-gallon steel drum that was on sale as a burn barrel. He paid in cash, his face a blank mask under the store's buzzing lights. The girl at the register didn't look at him twice. He drove the Honda back into the woods, not to his shack, but to the ravine where he'd buried the Smith & Wesson. The moon was high now, casting long, distorted shadows through the redwoods. He dug with the new shovel, the scrape and thud of it loud in the silence. He found the oilcloth-wrapped bundle a foot down. The gun was cold, heavy. A familiar weight. He took one of the new kitchen knives, a cheap boning knife with a thin, sharp blade, and tucked it into the back of his jeans. He drove to a gas station and filled the 5-gallon can. Then he parked the Honda a mile from his shack and walked the rest of the way, the gas can sloshing, the shovel over his shoulder. The shack was quiet, the 40 plants shimmering in the dark. He hadn't turned the lights on. He didn't need them. He knew where everything was. He activated the burner phone. The screen glowed, asking for a zip code. He punched in 90,210. He found Vic's number in his old phone's call history. He'd called him once, months ago, trying to sell his first small batch before he knew who he was. Vic had told him to get lost. He called the number. It rang twice. Yeah, Vic's voice said. It's Jace. A pause. You're calling from a strange number, kid. I'm being careful, Jace said. Cops might be listening. Smartest thing you've said all day, Vic said. You got my money. I got it. But I'm not meeting you on the highway. It's a setup. Cops all over the place. You're paranoid. You'd be paranoid too, Jace said, letting his voice shake a little. Look, I can't be seen. You want the $5,000, you come to me. My place. The shack in the hills. Another pause. Jace could hear Vic thinking, weighing the options. Jace was a scared rabbit, making stupid decisions. Coming to the shack put Vic in control. It was Vic's turf, even if Jace was squatting on it. You think I'm coming up there alone? Vic said. Bring whoever you want. I don't care. I just want this to be over. I'll have the money waiting. Fine, Vic said. 1 hour. The line went dead. Jace went to work. He dragged the new 55-gallon drum into a clearing 100 feet from the shack. He positioned it behind a thicket of manzanita. He put the gas can and the shovel next to it. He went back to the shack, chambered around in the Smith & Wesson, and sat in the dark, waiting. The knife was cold against the small of his back. He wasn't thinking about Carl or the tweaker or Tara. He was only thinking about the sound of a black Chevy pickup coming up the dirt road. 50 minutes later, he heard it. The low rumble of a V8 engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights cut through the trees, sweeping across the front of the shack. The truck stopped. The engine cut out. Silence. 2 doors opened and closed. Jace peered through a crack in the wall. Vic wasn't alone. He'd brought the wiry guy with the tire iron. Of course he had. The wiry guy was holding a long, heavy flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white circle in the darkness. Jace. Vic's voice boomed. You in there? Bring the money out. Let's finish this. Jace took a deep breath. He tucked the pistol into his waistband, covered it with his shirt. He picked up a canvas bag with about $1,000 in it. The rest was hidden under a floorboard. He stepped out of the shack. Right here, he said. The flashlight beam hit him in the face, blinding him. Just you? Vic asked. Just me. Vic and the wiry guy walked toward him. The wiry guy, whose name was apparently Skeeter, kept the light in Jace's eyes. Vic stopped a few feet away. Let's see the money, Vic said. Jace held up the canvas bag. It's all here. $5,000. Count it, Skeeter, Vic said. Skeeter handed Vic the flashlight, then snatched the bag from Jace. He opened it, started pulling out bundles of 20s. Vic held the light on the money, then on Jace's face, then back to the money. This ain't $5,000, Skeeter said, his voice a low rasp. This is maybe 1. Vic raised the flashlight beam back to Jace's face. The smile was gone. You think this is a negotiation? The rest is inside, Jace said, his voice tight. On the table. I didn't want to bring it all out. Vic looked at the shack, then back at Jace. You're making this difficult. He's playing games, Skeeter said. He dropped the bag of money and pulled something from his jacket. A flicker of polished steel in the flashlight's glare. A long, thin blade. A fillet knife. No games, Jace said, backing toward the shack. It's right inside. Come on. Vic nodded. Skeeter, you go with him. Get the money. I'll wait here. Skeeter grinned, a mouthful of bad teeth. He liked this part of the job. He followed Jace toward the door of the shack, the knife held low at his side. Jace stepped inside, into the pitch black. Skeeter followed him in. Where's the light switch in this dump? Skeeter asked. No switch, Jace said. He took another step into the darkness, putting some distance between them. It's on the table. To your right. Skeeter moved past him, feeling his way in the dark. Jace pulled the Smith & Wesson from his waistband. He heard Skeeter bump into the table. "There ain't nothing on this table, you little shit," Skeeter snarled, turning around. At the same moment, Vic's flashlight beam shot through the doorway, trying to find them. The light caught Skeeter first, illuminating his angry, pockmarked face. He raised his knife. Jace fired. The explosion was deafening inside the small wooden box of the shack. The muzzle flash was a star going off in his face. Skeeter was thrown backward as if punched, the knife flying from his hand. He hit the wall and slid down, making a sound like air leaking from a tire. Jace didn't wait. He spun toward the doorway just as Vic charged in, roaring with fury. Jace tried to bring the gun up, but Vic was too fast, a wall of muscle crashing into him. The gun flew from Jace's hand, skittering across the dirt floor into a dark corner. They went down in a heap, Jace on the bottom, the wind knocked out of him. Vic was on top of him, his big hands grabbing for Jace's throat. He was yelling something, his face a mask of rage in the dim light. Jace twisted, bucking, trying to get out from under Vic's weight. He felt the cheap kitchen knife dig into his back. He reached behind him, his fingers closing around the plastic handle. He pulled it free and drove it upward blindly with all his strength. Vic grunted, a sound of surprise and pain. His grip loosened. Jace shoved him off, scrambling to his feet. Vic was on his hands and knees, clutching at his stomach. There was a dark stain spreading on his flannel shirt. You little fuck," Vic gasped. Jace didn't hesitate. He lunged forward and stabbed him again. In the side. In the back. He didn't know how many times. It wasn't clean. It was a frantic, ugly, hacking motion. Vic fell onto his side, trying to ward off the blows with his arms. He was surprisingly strong, even now. He grabbed Jace's wrist, twisting. The knife fell to the floor. Jace kicked him. In the head. Once. Twice. Vic went limp. Jace stood over him, panting, his body screaming with adrenaline. The shack was filled with the coppery smell of blood. Skeeter was a motionless lump against the wall. Vic was a bigger lump in the middle of the floor. It was over. He stood there for a long time, listening to his own ragged breathing. Then he started to shake. His hands, his legs, his whole body. He stumbled to the corner of the room and threw up. When he was done, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve and went to work. He found the gun. He found the flashlight. He dragged Skeeter out first, then Vic. It was hard, messy work. They were heavy. He pulled them one by one to the clearing, to the steel drum. He tipped the barrel on its side, rolled them in. They barely fit. He picked up the 5-gallon can of gasoline. He poured it over the bodies. The smell was sharp, clean. He stood back and threw the lit Zippo he found in Skeeter's pocket. The gas ignited with a whoosh that singed his eyebrows. A column of greasy black smoke billowed up into the night sky, carrying the smell of burning plastic, burning hair, and something else. Something that would never wash off. He stood and watched the fire, the flames reflecting in his wide, empty eyes, his hands shaking so hard he had to hug them to his chest to make them stop. Chapter 15. The sun came up on a world that smelled like burnt hair. Jace stood in the clearing, watching the last of the smoke curl from the top of the steel drum. The fire had burned all night, a hot, contained orange eye in the darkness. Now it was just a black barrel full of ash and bone and melted zippers. He used the new shovel to dig a deep hole next to the drum, then tipped the hot, heavy barrel into it. The contents spilled out in a gray, lumpy mess. He didn't look too closely. He just started shoveling dirt on top, packing it down, burying the problem under 3 feet of Humboldt County soil. He drove Vic's truck, the black Chevy, deeper into the woods, miles down a forgotten logging spur, until the path was choked with fallen trees. He wiped it down, inside and out, left the keys on the dash, and walked back to the shack, his boots leaving faint prints in the damp earth. The paranoia was a living thing now, a passenger riding on his shoulders. Vic wasn't a freelancer. Guys like Vic, guys who controlled territory, they had partners. Suppliers. Buyers. People up the chain who would notice when he stopped answering his phone. People who would come looking for their product, or their money, or both. The 40 plants in the shack didn't care. They were fat with buds, heavy on their stems, stinking up the small room with the smell of money. His grow was safe. For now. He had to work. It was the only thing that kept the shaking from starting again. He spent the next 3 days harvesting. The work was mechanical, mindless. Snip, trim, hang. Snip, trim, hang. His fingers were black with resin. He didn't sleep. He ate protein bars and drank water from a jug, the Smith & Wesson on the trimming table next to the scissors. He kept the lights off, working by the beam of a headlamp, jumping at every sound from the woods outside. He ended up with just over 4 pounds of trimmed, drying bud. His best harvest yet. A fortune, hanging upside down from the rafters. It was also 4 pounds of evidence. He needed to move it. Fast. He couldn't call Silas. He couldn't go to the Arcata dispensary himself. That left Tara. He used the burner phone, his hands sweating so much he almost dropped it. He texted her number. Need to move product. Same guy as last time. He waited an hour. Nothing. He sent it again. It's 4 pounds. Your cut is $1,600. The money. That's what it came down to. He was betting her fear was cheaper than her rent. His phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Parking lot of the Blue Lake Casino. Tomorrow. 10 p.m. The back lot, by the RV parking. Come alone. Don't talk to me. The Blue Lake Casino was a monument to bad decisions, glowing in the middle of nowhere. Jace drove the stolen Honda, the 4 pounds of weed packed into 2 coolers in the trunk. He parked in the designated spot, a dark corner of the lot far from the main entrance. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and desperation. He sat and waited, watching the procession of hopefuls walking into the casino's bright, hungry mouth. At 10:15, a nondescript Toyota Camry pulled up next to him. Not the librarian from last time. This was a young guy, maybe 25, with a carefully trimmed beard and a bored expression. He got out, leaving his car running, and walked to Jace's window. "You're the gardener?" the kid asked. Jace nodded. "Let's see it." Jace popped the trunk. The kid walked to the back of the Honda, opened one of the coolers, took a quick look, then closed it. He came back to the window. "My boss heard there was some trouble in the neighborhood. Vic Torrance went on vacation." The kid's eyes were flat, disinterested, but he was watching Jace closely. "I don't know anything about that," Jace said. "Nobody does," the kid said. "Funny how that works. Because of the trouble, the price has changed. $2,000 a pound." Jace felt a flash of hot anger. Tara said 3. Tara's not the one buying. Vic's disappearance made the market unstable. Risk goes up, price goes down. You want to sell it, or not. $8,000. It was a kick in the teeth, but it was still $8,000. He had to take it. The weed was a ticking bomb. "Yeah," Jace said. "I want to sell it." "Good." The kid tossed a heavy canvas bag through the window onto the passenger seat. "Pleasure doing business with you." He took the coolers from Jace's trunk, put them in his own, and drove away without another word. Jace sat there for a minute, the bag of money next to him. He was supposed to feel like a winner. He'd taken out his main rival. He just made $8,000. But he felt like he'd just been demoted. The kid in the Camry, he wasn't scared of Jace. He hadn't been negotiating. He'd been dictating terms. The news was already on the street. Vic was gone and his territory was up for grabs. And the kid who'd been squatting in his backyard was small-time, desperate, and could be pushed around. He drove past Pine Ridge on his way back to the woods. He told himself he was just checking to see if there were cop cars, if there was still heat. But he knew why he was really there. Carl's trailer was dark, but there was a dim light on in the living room. A new-looking wheelchair ramp had been hastily built over the front steps. Jace parked the Honda across the street and waited. After a few minutes, the front door opened. Carl wheeled himself out onto the porch. Both of his legs were in heavy casts, propped up on the wheelchair's extenders. His right arm was in a sling. He moved slowly, painfully. He sat there for a moment, looking out at the sad little kingdom of the trailer park. Then his eyes found the faded green Honda across the street. He stiffened. Even from 50 yards away, Jace could see the fear in his posture. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by the rigid stillness of a rabbit that's seen a hawk's shadow. Carl stared at the car for a full minute, then slowly, painstakingly, wheeled himself back inside and shut the door. Jace should have felt good. He'd won. He'd put the fear in Carl for good. But the feeling was as hollow as a shotgun shell. He hadn't just beaten Carl. He had become the new monster of Pine Ridge. The thing people locked their doors against. He drove back to the shack, the $8,000 in the bag beside him. He felt invincible. He had killed 3 men, beaten another half to death, and walked away with a bag full of cash. He was a force of nature. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it wasn't over. Vic had bosses. Vic had associates. Vic had a whole network of people who were now missing a man and a steady supply of product. They wouldn't care about Skeeter. They wouldn't care about Carl. But they would care about the money. And they would come looking for the kid who had disrupted their business. He had taken the king off the board, and now all the other pieces were turning to look at him. Chapter 16. The idea of going legal was a seed that had sprouted in the dark, fed by paranoia and cash. It was the ultimate way out. Not running, not hiding, but becoming so legitimate that the ghosts of Vic Torrance and the men in the burn barrel couldn't touch him. He would become a taxpayer, a licensed producer, a name on a piece of paper in a county file cabinet. He would become invisible by standing in plain sight. He drove the stolen Honda to Eureka, to the county administration building. It was a block of concrete and smoked glass that smelled like floor wax and quiet desperation. He walked in wearing his cleanest dirty jeans and a t-shirt, feeling like a wolf trying to pass for a sheepdog. The woman at the counter for commercial cannabis licensing had a face that had seen every get-rich-quick scheme Humboldt County had to offer. She looked at Jace over the top of her reading glasses. "Can I help you?" "I want to apply for a license," Jace said. "A small grow." She pushed a pamphlet across the counter. "The application process is online. You'll need to form a corporate entity, provide a complete business plan with financials, source of funds documentation, a premises diagram, and undergo a full live scan background check with the Department of Justice." She said it all in one breath, a speech she'd given 1,000 times. Jace stared at her. Source of funds. Background check. He had a bag with $8,000 in it, and a body count of 3. "What if my funds are cash?" he asked. The woman's expression didn't change. "All funds must be verifiable through a registered financial institution. We don't accept shoeboxes full of money, dear." Next. Jace walked out into the sunlight, the dream of legitimacy already turning sour. His cash was worthless here. His power was worthless here. He was just a kid with a criminal record he didn't even have yet. He needed a different door. A back door. He found it through the blessed kid at the grow shop. "You want to go legit," the kid said, leaning on the counter. "You don't go to the county. You go to a consultant. A guy who knows the loopholes. A guy who can structure your assets. You know a guy. I know a guy who knows a guy." The kid wrote a name and a number on a rolling paper. Julian Black. He owns the Emerald Phoenix dispensary in Arcata. The nice one, with the security guard and the potted ferns. He helps people. For a price. Julian Black's office was above the dispensary. It had hardwood floors, a leather couch, and a big window that looked out over the town square. Julian was in his 40s, dressed in a tailored shirt and expensive jeans. He had silver at his temples and the calm, predatory smile of a shark that had just eaten. He offered Jace a bottle of sparkling water. Jace took it. "So," Julian said, sitting behind a clean, empty desk. "You're the artist from the hills." The words sent a jolt of ice through Jace's gut. "Don't look so worried," Julian said with a chuckle. "It's a small town. And your product is excellent. I bought some from one of my runners. Very impressive." "I want to go legal," Jace said, getting straight to it. "Of course you do," Julian said. "It's the new American dream. From black market to stock market." He leaned forward. "But you have a problem. You have no history. You have no clean money. To the state of California, you don't exist. Except, perhaps, as a person of interest in a few recent, unfortunate events." Julian let that hang in the air. He knew. Of course he knew. "I can help with that," Julian continued smoothly. "I can create a corporation for you. I can structure your investment as a loan from one of my other holding companies. I can lease you a piece of land that's already zoned and permitted. I can walk your application through the county myself. In 6 months, you'd be a legitimate, licensed producer. A partner in the Emerald Phoenix supply chain." It was everything Jace wanted. A clean slate. A legal future. "What's it cost?" Jace asked. "My services aren't cheap. And the county fees, the lawyers, the land lease. It requires a significant upfront capital investment to get the ball rolling." Julian named a number. $50,000. The number sucked the air out of the room. Jace had maybe 20 grand left, stashed in the walls of the shack. "I don't have that," Jace said. "That's a shame," Julian said, his smile unwavering. "Because the opportunity won't last. The window to get these small grow licenses is closing. And frankly, with Vic Torrance out of the picture, things are getting competitive. There are other players moving in. Guys from down south. Not as reasonable as Vic." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "If you should come into some capital, you know where to find me." Jace walked out of the dispensary into the afternoon sun, his dream dangling just out of reach. $50,000. It might as well have been $1 million. He needed cash. A lot of it. And he needed it now. He thought about what Julian had said. Other players moving in. He spent the next 2 days in the stolen Honda, drinking coffee and watching a nondescript little house on a side street in McKinleyville. He'd gotten the address from a trimmer he knew, a girl who worked for a loudmouth dealer named Rico. Rico was one of the new guys, up from Stockton. He was careless. He bragged about the cash he kept at his stash house because he didn't trust banks. He was, Julian had hinted with a sly look, a problem for the local market. On the 3rd night, Jace went in. He wore a black hoodie, gloves, and a ski mask he'd bought at a thrift store. He had the Smith & Wesson he'd dug up again, tucked in his waistband. This was how you got capital. You didn't earn it. You took it. He kicked the back door in. No finesse. Just noise and aggression. Rico was on the couch, watching TV, a bag of chips in his lap. A skinny kid, maybe Jace's age, was at the kitchen table, weighing out ounces on a digital scale. They both froze, their faces a perfect picture of surprise. "Don't move," Jace said, his voice a low growl he didn't recognize. The skinny kid at the table started to stand up. Jace pistol whipped him, a sharp, brutal crack of steel against bone. The kid went down without a sound. Rico stared, his mouth open, chips scattered on his shirt. "The money," Jace said, pointing the gun at Rico's face. "Where is it?" What money, man?" Rico stammered. Jace didn't waste time talking. He walked over and kicked the coffee table into Rico's shins. "I'm not asking again." Rico scrambled backward, crab walking away from him. In the bedroom. Under the bed. A shoebox. Jace kept the gun on him, backing into the bedroom. He kicked the bed. A Nike shoebox slid out. He picked it up. It was heavy. Full of cash, bound in rubber bands. He walked back into the living room. Rico was still on the floor, staring at the unconscious kid on the kitchen linoleum. "Don't forget my face," Jace said, pulling the ski mask off for a second. "Let him see. Let the story get out. There was a new monster in the woods. Tell your friends from Stockton to stay home." He hit Rico with the butt of the gun, a solid, thudding blow to the side of the head. Not enough to kill him. Enough to make a point. He left them both there, the TV still playing, to an empty room, and walked out into the night, the shoebox under his arm. He drove the Honda to the coast and left it at a scenic overlook, keys in it. He walked for miles, then called a cab with the burner phone. He counted the money in the back of the cab. Over $30,000. Added to what he had, it was enough. He had the capital. He was going to be a legitimate businessman. But he just declared war on a whole new set of people. He had solved his money problem by creating a problem that was bigger and more dangerous than Vic Torrance had ever been. He was climbing a ladder, but every rung was greased with blood. Chapter 17. Jace walked into Julian Black's office with a gym bag full of cash. He put it on the polished desk between them. It made a solid, satisfying thud. Julian didn't look at the bag. He looked at Jace. "That was fast," Julian said, his smile as smooth and cool as the glass of sparkling water on his desk. "I'm motivated." "So I hear." Julian steepled his fingers. "The word on the street is that Rico and his associate from Stockton had a rather forceful market correction. Someone apparently advised them that their business model was unsustainable in this county." Jace didn't say anything. He just stared back. "That creates a vacuum," Julian said, his voice casual. "And other people more serious than Rico, tend to dislike vacuums. They're coming. From Sacramento, I hear. Looking for their investment." He finally glanced at the gym bag. "Are you sure you want to plant roots here, Jace? It might be a good time to take your capital and find a state with fewer extradition treaties." "I'm sure," Jace said. "Are we doing this or not?" Julian's smile widened. He liked that. No fear. Just business. "Of course we are." He slid a folder across the desk. "These are the incorporation papers for Humboldt Hillside Provisions, LLC. You're the sole proprietor. I'll file them this afternoon. The $50,000 capital contribution will be structured as a loan from a management company I own. Clean. You're now a legitimate small businessman, in debt up to your eyeballs to a silent partner. Me." He stood up. "Congratulations, Jace. You're in the game." As Jace walked out, Julian added, "Oh, and Jace, I would find a new place to live. That shack in the woods has an expiration date, and I think it's coming up soon." The news came, as it always did, through the grapevine that ended with Tara. She'd been texting him, short clipped messages. "They're here. Asking about Vic. Asking about Rico." He knew he shouldn't see her. She was a loose end. A witness. But she was also his only window to the world outside the woods. He met her in the alley behind the Rusty Pelican after her shift. The air was cold, smelling of stale beer and wet dumpsters. "This is the last time, Jace," she said, not looking at him. She lit a cigarette, her hands shaking. I can't do this anymore. What are they saying? They're not saying anything. That's what's scary. She took a long drag. They're not like Vic's guys, all loud and looking for a fight. These guys are quiet. They look like they could be Mormon missionaries, except for their eyes. Who are they? The guys Rico worked for. Out of Sacramento. They came into the bar last night. Two of them. Ordered club sodas. Showed me a picture of you. The words hit Jace like a physical blow. A picture? Where did they get a picture? I don't know. Gas station security cam. DMV. Who cares? Tara's voice was brittle. They didn't ask if I knew you. They just said, we're looking for this man. He sometimes comes in here. If you see him, we'd appreciate a call. Then they left $100 bill on the bar. She looked at him then, her green eyes full of a fear that was deeper than anything she'd ever shown before. These aren't tweakers or old cons, Jace. They're professionals. They're not going to burn your shack. They're going to wait for you to walk out of it, and then put you in a hole where no one will ever find you. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The fear was a current arcing between them. He reached out, not to comfort her, but to ground himself. He grabbed her arm. She didn't pull away. They don't know about the shack, he said, more to himself than to her. Don't be stupid. Julian Black knows. The kid at the grow shop knows. I know. You think these guys can't find out? She dropped her cigarette, crushed it under her boot. You hit their stash house. You took their money. This isn't about territory anymore. It's about payback. He pulled her toward him. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. He pressed her against the cold brick wall of the alley, his hands tangled in her hair, her hands grabbing at the back of his shirt. It was frantic, ugly, a desperate, clothes-on fumbling in the dark. A last-ditch effort to feel something other than pure, cold terror. It was over in a minute, leaving them both breathing hard and feeling emptier than before. She pushed him away. I'm done, she whispered, her voice ragged. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm taking my sister's car, and I'm going to Portland. Tonight. You should do the same. I can't, he said. I just paid Julian $50,000. I have 40 plants in the ground. The plants are already dead, she said. You just don't know it yet. She turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner without looking back, leaving him alone in the alley with the ghosts of all his bad decisions. He drove the stolen Honda. He couldn't risk using his own truck now, back toward the hills. Julian was right. The shack was a coffin waiting for a nail. But it was his coffin. And all his product, his future, was inside it. He parked a mile away and walked the rest, moving through the trees like a shadow. He didn't use a light. He had the Smith & Wesson in his hand. The shack was dark, silent. He circled it twice, listening. Nothing but the wind. He went inside. The hum of the fans was a comforting sound. The purple glow of the lamps was the only home he had. He checked the plants. He checked his stash of cash. It was all there. He was still in business. But Tara's words echoed in the small room. They're going to wait for you to walk out. He couldn't stay here. But he couldn't leave the plants. It was a trap of his own making. He sat on an overturned bucket, the pistol in his lap. He thought about the men from Sacramento. The quiet ones. The ones with his picture. They wouldn't come crashing through the woods like Vic. They would be patient. They would wait. They would watch. He got up and started to work. He dragged the empty 55-gallon burn barrel into the shack. He found a can of black spray paint and painted the silver solar panels on the roof a dull, non-reflective black. He cut branches and lashed them to the sides of the shack, breaking up its square outline. Camouflage. It was a stupid, desperate move, but doing something felt better than doing nothing. He sat back down, the pistol across his knees, and faced the door. He was armed. He was ready. But he knew, with a certainty that felt like swallowing glass, that it wouldn't be enough. He wasn't waiting for a fight. He was waiting to be erased. And the quiet men were coming. Chapter 18. For 3 days, Jace lived in a state of suspended animation. He moved from the cot to the door, from the door to the wall, peering through the cracks at the unchanging woods. The 40 plants were drinking light and water, oblivious. The hum of the fans was the only sound in the world. He had a pound of the earliest maturing buds, curing in a duffel bag, a frantic preemptive harvest. He had his cash, what was left of it after paying Julian, tucked in a gym bag. And he had the Smith & Wesson, which he cleaned twice a day whether it needed it or not. The waiting was the worst part. It hollowed him out, leaving a space for the quiet men from Sacramento to move into. He saw them in the flicker of leaves, heard them in the snap of a twig that was just a squirrel, a deer, a branch falling a mile away. On the 4th day, he saw them for real. He was on the roof of the shack, a wrench in his hand, tightening a loose connector on one of the spray-painted solar panels. He was exposed, silhouetted against the gray sky, and he knew it was stupid, but one of the batteries wasn't charging right. He kept his movements small, slow. And then he froze. Down the slope, maybe 200 yards away, moving through a stand of old-growth fir, were 2 figures. They weren't hikers. They weren't hunters. They wore dark jackets and jeans, and they moved with a quiet, purposeful economy, their heads turning, scanning the terrain. One of them pointed up the hill, in the general direction of the shack. They didn't see him on the roof. Not yet. They were too far away. They were just confirming their path. Jace slid off the roof on the backside of the shack, landing soft in a pile of damp leaves. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. This was it. The expiration date Julian had talked about. He didn't run for the gun inside. His first thought was the shovel, the one he'd used to bury the barrel, leaning against a tree 50 feet away. It was closer. It was silent. He grabbed it, the steel cool and solid in his hands. He slipped into the deep shadow of a fallen redwood that lay alongside the narrow track leading up to the shack. The ground was soft here, the air thick with the smell of decay. He crouched, making himself small, the shovel held like a baseball bat. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The only sound was his own blood roaring in his ears. Then he heard them. Not a sound of footsteps, but a sense of presence. A displaced stone. A soft brush against a fern. One of them was coming up the track. The other, he guessed, was circling around, flanking the shack. A professional approach. A man came into view. He was younger than Jace had expected, with a neat beard and the calm, focused expression of someone doing a job. He held a pistol, a Glock, down at his side, holding it with a casual familiarity. He walked past Jace's hiding spot, his eyes on the shack 20 yards ahead. Jace moved. He didn't think. He uncoiled from his crouch in one explosive motion, swinging the shovel low and hard, like he was trying to hit a line drive. The sound was not what he expected. It wasn't a crack of bone. It was a dull, meaty thud, a sound of heavy metal hitting something soft that wasn't supposed to give. The man cried out, a sharp, high yelp of pure agony and surprise, and his leg buckled under him. He went down in a heap, his pistol skittering into the leaves. "Marco," a voice yelled from the woods to the right. What was that? Jace didn't wait. He didn't look at the man writhing on the ground, clutching his shattered leg. He turned and sprinted for the shack, crashing through the underbrush. He burst through the door, his mind a white-hot blank. The bags. The duffel bag with the pound of weed. The gym bag with the $2,000 in cash. He grabbed them both. He slung them over his shoulder. The Smith & Wesson was on the cot. He scooped it up, shoved it in his waistband. That was it. No time for anything else. The plants, the lights, the fans, the whole $50,000 investment, it was all just scenery now. "I see him," the second man shouted, closer now. A gunshot cracked through the woods, and a slug tore through the thin wall of the shack 6 inches from Jace's head. He ran out the back, away from the voices, crashing headlong into the forest. He ran blindly, all instinct, branches whipping at his face, the 2 bags bouncing and slamming against his body. He could hear them behind him, one of them yelling, the other one screaming in pain. He didn't look back. He just ran, until his lungs were on fire and his legs were jelly. After 5 minutes, when he thought he was far enough away, he risked a glance over his shoulder. He couldn't see them, but he could smell it. A faint chemical scent on the wind. Gasoline. He scrambled to the top of a small ridge and looked back toward where the shack should be. A column of thick black smoke was pushing its way up through the canopy of the trees, staining the gray sky. They were burning it. They were erasing him. He kept moving, slower now, trying to be quiet. He found the stolen Honda where he'd left it, hidden in a thicket of blackberry bushes a mile from the shack. He threw the bags in the back, got in, and drove, his hands shaking so hard he could barely keep them on the wheel. He drove for 2 hours, taking back roads, watching his mirrors, until he hit Highway 101. He drove south until the sign said Ukiah. He found a motel on the outskirts of town, a place called the Sleepy Pine, with a flickering neon sign and peeling paint. He paid cash for a room at the back. The room smelled of cigarettes and regret. The carpet was stained, the bedspread was a faded, ugly floral pattern. He locked the door, bolted the chain, and dumped the bags on the bed. He had 1 pound of weed in a duffel bag. He had a gym bag with a little over $2,000. He had a stolen gun. That was it. That was the sum total of his entire operation. His LLC. His legitimate business. He sat on the edge of the musty bed, the Smith & Wesson in his lap. He was alive. He had escaped. But as he stared at the water-stained ceiling of the cheap motel room, he knew he hadn't escaped anything. He'd just run out of room to run. He was broke, he was hunted, and he was right back where he started. No worse. He was back at the start, but now the monsters knew his name. Chapter 19. The Sleepy Pine Motel wasn't for sleeping. It was for hiding. For 2 days, Jace stayed in the room, the door chained, the curtains drawn, living on vending machine crackers and warm soda. The pound of weed in the duffel bag filled the small room with a rich, dangerous perfume. It was his last ace, and it was getting louder every hour he sat on it. The $2,000 from the gym bag felt like pocket change. It was enough to keep hiding, but hiding was just a slow death. He needed to turn the weed into cash. He couldn't go back to Humboldt. Tara was gone. Julian Black thought he was a ghost with a $50,000 debt. The Sacramento crew would be watching the dispensaries. He was in Ukiah, a stranger in a strange town. He needed a local buyer. He used the burner phone to search online classifieds. He found what he was looking for under collectibles. A post from 3 days ago, looking for vintage Humboldt artisanal botanicals. Serious collector. Cash paid. It was a long shot. It could be a cop. It could be a rip-off. It was also the only door he could see. He texted the number. "I have a pound of 2018 vintage." The reply came back a minute later. "How vintage?" "Fresh," Jace texted. "From a private collection in the hills. Meet me. Parking lot of the Pear Tree Center. North End, by the Goodwill. 1 hour. Drive a gray sedan." Jace ditched the stolen Honda in an apartment complex parking lot and walked the 2 miles to the Pear Tree Center. It was a dying strip mall, half the storefronts empty. He sat on a concrete bench, the duffel bag at his feet, and watched the cars come and go. A dusty gray Toyota sedan pulled into the lot and parked 2 rows away. A man got out. He was in his 50s, with a gray ponytail and a Grateful Dead t-shirt that was 20 years older than Jace. He had the gaunt, leathery look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. An old-school grower, pushed out by the new legal market. The man walked over, didn't look at Jace, and sat on the other end of the bench. "You the collector?" Jace asked. "Sometimes," the man said. He was looking at the duffel bag. "Let's see it." Jace unzipped the bag an inch. The smell bloomed in the warm afternoon air. The man inhaled, his eyes closing for a second. "That's the stuff," he said. He nodded toward his car. "Pop the trunk." They did the deal right there in the parking lot. Two ghosts from different eras of the same losing game. Jace put the bag in the trunk of the Toyota. The man handed him a thin, beat-up envelope. Jace counted it. $2,500. "That's the price," Jace said. "It's the price for strangers," the man said, his eyes scanning the parking lot. "You ain't local. That weed is hot. I'm doing you a favor, taking it off your hands." He got in his car. "Lose my number." He drove away. Jace stood there with $2,500 in his hand. Added to what he had, it gave him just under $5,000. It wasn't a comeback. It was a bus ticket to nowhere. Or it was a down payment. He spent the next day finding a new place. Not in the woods. Not isolated. He found it on the south side of town, a dingy neighborhood of small post-war houses with chain-link fences and peeling paint. An ad on a bulletin board at a laundromat said, "Workshop for rent. Power, water, INCL. No questions." The landlord was a woman named Maria, who looked like she'd been tired since the day she was born. She had 3 kids running around the dusty yard, and a husband who was a long-haul trucker gone for weeks at a time. The workshop was a cinder-block shed behind the house, with a single metal door and no windows. $1,200 for the first month, $800 a month after that, Maria said, not meeting his eyes. Cash only. You make a mess, you clean it up. You make noise, you're out. I don't see you, I don't hear you. Deal, Jace said. He counted out the cash. She took it without a word, and gave him a key. He was back in the shed business. It was smaller, hotter, and riskier than the shack. He had neighbors. He had a landlord. But it was anonymous. It was a box, in a row of other boxes. He went to a local hydro store, not the one in Eureka, and spent $2,000 on a small tent, a single 600-watt light, a carbon filter, and 10 starter plants. A micro-grow. Pathetic. But it was a start. He set it up inside the cinder block walls, a secret garden in a forgotten neighborhood. He was sitting on an upturned bucket, staring at the 10 small plants when his burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. His first instinct was to smash the phone. He answered it instead. Yeah. Jace. It was Tara's voice. He almost didn't recognize it. It was thin, strained. Where are you? He asked. Doesn't matter. Not Portland. A short, bitter laugh. Car broke down outside of Redding. My sister's a bitch. It doesn't matter. Why are you calling me? Because I heard something. A friend of a friend, who works at a dispensary Julian Black is involved with. She said the Sacramento guys, they pulled out. Jace went cold. What do you mean, pulled out? They left. Went back home. The guy you hit with the shovel, Marco. His uncle is somebody important in their organization. They came up to get him back and send a message. They sent it. They burned your spot. They figure you're either dead, gone, or so small you don't matter anymore. They cut their losses. He was silent, trying to process the information. It sounded too good to be true. You believe that? He asked. No, she said, and her voice was a ghost whisper. I don't. Guys like that don't just leave. They're patient. Maybe they're just letting you get comfortable. The line was quiet for a moment. He could hear traffic in the background on her end. "Jace," she said, her voice barely audible. "Get out. Take whatever money you have and just disappear. This isn't a game you can win." The line went dead. Jace sat in the dark shed, the purple glow of the single light painting his face. The Sacramento crew was gone. He was safe. For now. He had a new spot, a new crop on the way. He was rebuilding. But Tara's words hung in the air. "This isn't a game you can win." He went to the trunk of the Honda he hadn't dumped yet and got the Smith & Wesson. He brought it back to the shed. He stripped it, cleaned it, oiled it. He loaded the magazine, slid it home with a solid, satisfying click. He put the gun on the small table next to the grow tent. He lay down on a pile of empty soil bags, using his jacket as a pillow. The shed was hot, close, smelling of dirt and plastic, and the faint green promise of the tiny plants. He closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He listened to the sounds of the city around him, a dog barking, a siren in the distance, a couple arguing next door. He was surrounded by people, but he had never been more alone. He was ready for anything. And he knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the gun beside him, that anything was exactly what was coming. Chapter 20. The 10 plants in the grow tent were budding. Little white hairs frosting up on tight green knuckles. The smell was just starting, a faint, hopeful promise. It was the only good thing in the cinder block shed. The rest was heat, paranoia, and the slow ticking of a clock. Jace was down to his last $600. The rent was due in 2 weeks. The plants were 5 weeks from harvest. The math didn't work. He'd been living on instant noodles and gas station coffee, leaving the shed only after midnight to walk to a 24-hour market 3 miles away. Each trip was a roll of the dice. He ditched the last stolen car. He was on foot, anonymous, just another ghost moving through Ukiah's tired sleeping streets. He made a run on a Tuesday night. The air was cool, smelling of cut grass and asphalt. He bought a can of chili, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of nutrients for the budding plants. The bag was thin plastic, barely holding the weight. He walked back with his head down, hoodie up, just another shadow. He was a block from the shed, on a dark street lined with chain-link fences and sleeping houses, when a figure stepped out from behind a parked van. "Hey man," the figure said. The voice was a gravelly whisper. Jace kept walking. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The figure moved to block his path. It was a man, thin as a rail, his face a hollow mask in the dim streetlight. He smelled like sour sweat and cheap wine. A local junkie, his eyes burning with a desperate, familiar fire. "I don't have any money," Jace said, his hand moving to the waistband of his jeans. The Smith & Wesson was a cold, hard comfort against his skin. "Everybody's got something," the junkie said. He took a step closer, and something glinted in his hand. A knife. Not a real knife, but one of those cheap, flimsy box cutters with a retractable blade. Still, it was sharp enough. "The bag. And your wallet. Let's have 'em. Nice and easy." Jace looked at the man. At the shaky hand, holding the box cutter. At the sunken, hopeless eyes. This wasn't a Sacramento professional. This wasn't Vic Torrance. This was a stray dog, rabid and stupid. A random problem. And Jace knew how to solve problems now. It was the one thing he had learned to do well. He didn't say a word. He didn't raise his hands. He let the grocery bag slip from his fingers. The can of chili hit the pavement with a heavy thud. As the junkie's eyes flickered down toward the sound, Jace moved. He drew the gun and fired in one smooth, practiced motion. The shot wasn't as loud as it had been in the trailer, swallowed by the open night air, but it was still a definitive, final sound. The junkie grunted, a soft sound of surprise, as if he'd been punched in the chest. He looked down at the dark hole that had appeared in his thin jacket. He looked up at Jace, his expression not of pain, but of confusion. Then his legs gave out, and he folded onto the sidewalk in a boneless heap. The box cutter clattered beside him. Jace stood over the body, the gun still level, the smell of cordite sharp in the cool air. A dog started barking from a backyard down the street. A light came on in an upstairs window. He didn't panic. The cold, clear calm washed over him again. This was just logistics. He holstered the gun, grabbed the junkie under the arms, and dragged him into the deep shadows of the alley that ran behind the houses. He was heavier than the tweaker from the trailer. He left a dark trail on the sidewalk. Jace would have to come back for that. He half carried, half dragged the man the rest of the way to the shed. He got the door open, pulled the body inside, and shut it, plunging them into the purple twilight of the grow tent. He laid the man on the concrete floor. Another body. Another mess. He went back out with a bucket of water and a rag and scrubbed the sidewalk, the dark smear turning into a wider, paler stain that would be gone by morning. He picked up his can of chili. The bread was squashed, but it was still good. He couldn't bury the body here. The landlord, Maria, her kids playing in the yard, it was too risky. He needed a car. He walked for an hour to a different part of town, a neighborhood of apartment buildings with crowded carports. He found what he needed, a beat-up Ford Escort wagon with a mismatched front fender. He popped the lock, hot-wired it, and drove back to the shed. He loaded the body into the back of the wagon, covering it with a tarp he found in a nearby dumpster. He drove out of town, into the hills south of Ukiah, the wagon's tired engine complaining on the grades. He found a place, a steep ravine off a fire road, a place where the world dumped its mistakes. He rolled the body out of the back. It tumbled down into the darkness and disappeared. He didn't watch it go. He drove the Escort to the parking lot of a 24-hour casino on a nearby reservation. He wiped it down clean and left it in a row of other sad, forgotten cars. He walked the 8 miles back to Ukiah, the sun coming up as he reached the outskirts of town. He slipped back into the shed as the neighborhood was waking up, the smell of coffee and bacon in the air. He locked the door behind him. He was safe. He was home. His 10 plants were fine. They had grown a little overnight. In a month, they'd be ready. They'd yield maybe a pound and a half if he was lucky. Enough to get him a couple $1,000s. Enough to pay the rent and buy more plants. Enough to keep the game going. He sat on an overturned bucket, the Smith & Wesson on the table beside him. The Sacramento crew was gone, Tara had said. But he didn't believe it. They were patient. And what about the junkie? Did he have a brother? A friend who'd wonder where he went? What about Rico's friends from Stockton? He had solved one problem last night, but in solving it, he just opened the door for more. He was alive. He was a producer. He had a business. But the business was a cage. He had traded a trailer park for a cinder block shed, one set of enemies for another. He was 19 years old, and he was already a ghost, burying other ghosts in the dark. He looked at the 10 small plants, their leaves reaching for the artificial light, and he knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the steel of the gun beside him, that Tara was right. It wasn't a game you could win. It was just a game you could play for a little while longer, until the day you ran out of luck, or bullets, or places to bury the bodies. And a new monster, hungrier and harder than you, came to take your spot. He picked up the gun, checked the load, and settled in to wait. Get ready for California gold out soon. Don't miss. Single wide. Heir apparent. Touched. Back to business. Zero trace. Target rich.